Chapter 364. There were already a lot of sea beasts surrounding the aircraft. Fortunately, these sea beasts were focused on taking refuge, so they didn't show any hostility towards the aircraft. At most, they would scratch it with their claws out of curiosity. The hunting of the sawtooth fish lasted for an hour. When the surface of the sea gradually calmed down, these hunters didn't leave completely. The calmness of the sea did not mean that they had officially left. In the waters under the sea, there was still a large group of sawtooth fish that had stayed behind. Therefore, to see if the sawtooth fish had completely left, they just needed to look at the movements of the sea beasts that were taking refuge on the reef. Not all of these sea beasts were amphibians. Many of them could only stay on the reef for a short period of time. They would only risk leaving the water for a longer period of time when they were taking refuge. Therefore, compared to other sea beasts, these guys were the most anxious. Scylla and the others only needed to pay attention to the movements of these sea beasts. After another 10 minutes, some sea beasts began to slowly approach the water. After a few sea beasts tested the water, they suddenly plunged into the water and disappeared in a short while. Other sea beasts began to enter the water one after another. The originally crowded atoll began to become sparse, and the lords also began to expel the outsiders. Get ready to move. After the sea beasts left the atoll, Lung said, Scylla, call Whis back. We're going to the target. Hui Mao, who was called back by Scylla, was still a little unsatisfied. However, after flying out of the sea, it didn't immediately enter the aircraft. Instead, it found a few key spots in the previously cleared area and peed, then rubbed itself on the reef. Is this dividing territory? Pescado asked. It should be, but I'm not sure if the sea beasts will understand how cats divide territory, another person replied. Whis had tossed the dead sea beast into the sea and fed it to the sawtooth fishes. There were still some blue blood stains on the reef, but Whis didn't think that these blood stains would be enough to scare the little sea beasts away. Therefore, it left a scent here in its own way. If the sea beasts didn't know what was good for them, then it could just kill them right away. It was a very reasonable excuse. After marking the territory, Hui Mao entered the aircraft. Lung switched the aircraft to diving mode and entered the sea. After the aircraft entered the water, Scylla and the others officially saw the big stairs under the atoll. The stairs extended from the steep slope of the atoll all the way to the depths of the sea. The surface area of the sea still had some light shining in. Although the sea beasts in the middle area had darkened after being hunted by the sawtooth fish, they could still see various kinds of sea beasts swimming underwater. There aren't many large sea beasts in the surface area. Sometimes, the sea beasts in the middle area would come out for a walk in order to hunt. However, generally speaking, you won't encounter such large sea beasts here. The one that was killed was considered large in the surface area, but in the middle area was nothing. Whis would have been killed. Whis fish in the sea of the sea. Many of the things recorded in the information weren't complete. When they encountered an unfamiliar species, Lung would have his subordinates record the new species and analyze the basic information of this sea beast together. Scylla was also able to understand quite a bit of information from their discussions. There were a lot of information that didn't necessarily require all kinds of instruments to analyze. People like Lung and the others who were very familiar with the sea could infer a large amount of information from the sea beast's external appearance and body shape when they saw a sea beast. The advantages and disadvantages of every species' evolution were clearly displayed in the eyes of Lung and the others. Perhaps this group of sea beasts had mutated in a random direction in the special magnetic field of the sea paradise, but the natural directional selection would allow the outstanding mutants to survive. Every organ, every type of body shape, always had its own reason. The deeper they went, the darker the light in the sea. However, Lung didn't have anyone turn on the aircraft's lighting equipment, but instead used night vision equipment. Here, many sea beasts were sensitive to light, and the aircraft's illumination would excite those big guys. There are a lot of ferocious-looking big guys out there, but their tempers aren't as bad as they look. They don't have much curiosity towards foreign objects, and they're only interested in familiar prey. Lung told Sillin after the spaceplane swam past a 70-meter-long sea beast. Squatting on Sillin's shoulder, Huimao smacked his lips as he watched the guy leisurely wagging its tail away on the screen. Sure enough, one couldn't judge a sea beast by its appearance alone. Perhaps it was because this area had just been cleaned up by the school of sawtooth fish, but the aircraft didn't run into any trouble when it went down. There were relatively few sea beasts that appeared. The sea beasts in the middle area were indeed huge. The few sea beasts they saw were all about 100 meters long. Some looked like jellyfish, while others had all kinds of strange shapes and sizes. Sillin looked at the display on the screen. Right now, the aircraft was already more than 2,700 meters deep. Based on the results of the previous probes, they would find something soon. Beep, beep, as expected, the aircraft's probe equipment beeped. This is where the abnormal signal started, a subordinate said to Lung. Analyze it in depth. Lung turned on an instrument that the previous probes didn't have. The previous 5 probes hadn't been able to replicate this signal either. They had no choice but to analyze it after they got here. Very soon, the results were out. It's like a signal that tells anyone who comes here where to go, the person operating the analyzer said. The person operating the scanner said, "Young master, should we follow the direction of the signal?" Lung didn't say anything. He shot Sillin a glance before walking towards a rest room. Sillin tossed Huimao onto Cheto's shoulder and followed Lung into the room. Inside the room, Lung closed the door and took out the star map. The glowing key on the star map was pointing in a certain direction like a needle, but that direction wasn't where the signal was pointing. "What do you think?" Lung asked Sillin. "Just follow the star map and ignore the signal," Sillin said. Although he didn't know much about the Shi clan, from what little he knew, he felt that the signal was more like a misdirection to someone who didn't have a star chart. After staring at the star map for a while, Lung put it away. "Then let's follow the directions on the star map." Although Pescado and the others didn't understand why their young master didn't follow the direction of the signal and insisted on following the original destination, they still followed Lung's instructions. Ingweji shot a glance at Lung and Sillin before continuing with a serious expression. He knew that his young master definitely knew some crucial information, but he didn't expect that his young master wouldn't even tell him, an old man who was always by Foko's side. Instead, he was discussing it with a team leader from the hunter group. "What kind of information is it?" Suddenly, Ingweji's eyelids twitched. "It can't be, the tear of God." Right now, the temperature of the seawater was basically the same, and their surroundings were pitch black. At first, the spaceplane was able to observe their surroundings with the aid of night vision equipment. But when they were 7,000 meters below the surface, the magnetic field's interference grew stronger, and some basic equipment such as the night vision equipment started to go on strike. "We're approaching the seabed," Pescado said. Earlier, they had lost contact with the detectors when they were close to the seabed, and now they were experiencing the same thing. "Slow down by one more level. Be careful." "Yes, young master." The display screen displayed the same blurry outline of an underwater city as the previous detectors, but it was impossible to see it clearly because the night vision equipment had gone on strike. "They should be entering this underwater city by now, right?" Sillin didn't pay attention to the data or the other equipment on the spaceplane. Instead, he paid attention to Huimao's ears. This guy's ears were much more useful than the equipment Lung and the others were using. Lying on top of Cheto's body, Huimao's eyes were closed, its tail was wagging slowly, and its ears were twitching ever so slightly. Suddenly, Huimao's ears twitched once before it opened its eyes and patted Cheto with its paw. Then, it looked at Sillin and said, "We're here." Lung and the others looked at Huimao and were about to ask him something when all the lights inside the spaceplane suddenly went out. Even the analysis equipment inside the spaceplane had stopped working. Lung took out the backup lights. They weren't electrical lights, but natural fluorescent stones. Although they couldn't compare to the lighting system, they could still brighten up the spaceplane a little. "Young master, the thrusters have stopped working, and all the equipment can't be activated." The spaceplane is falling right now. Pescado said. Bang! Bang! A moment later, the spaceplane came to a stop. We've reached the seabed. What do we do, young master? Lung looked at the equipment in his hand. The equipment the Andryra family had made for Sea Paradise was basically dead. They could only rely on themselves now. Let's go out and take a look, Lung said. There was no point in staying inside the spaceplane. Since the spaceplane couldn't be activated, they would only be waiting for death. Maybe some undersea overlord would come over and step on them, and they wouldn't even know what it was that stepped on them. Young master, it's pitch black outside right now, and we can't just take out our lights. You know that there are a lot of big things at the bottom of the sea, a subordinate said. We won't get out of here if we play it safe. We can only take risks. Let's go. While saying this, Lung walked to the buffer cabin and put on his protective suit. The others also checked their protective suits and equipment. After they were ready, Ingweji stood in front of Lung and shielded him. The cabin door opened, and seawater poured in. Without the spaceplane's pressure balancing function, everyone could clearly feel the pressure even though they were wearing anti-pressure protective suits. The first communicator inside the protective suit had stopped working, and the second communicator only had an effective range of 100 meters. Therefore, they couldn't split up too much. Huimao swung his 4 fat legs and swayed around Silin like he was floating. His perception has weakened, Huimao said. However, even if his perception had weakened, it was still better than Lung's equipment. Lung took out a cannon-shaped object and pointed it at the sky. Bang bang bang. After a few consecutive sounds, lights appeared from the seawater above them. They were all fluorescent spheres, but they were wrapped in a layer of outer shell, allowing them to float in the air. With the illumination of these fluorescent spheres, they could clearly see their surroundings. Although the light seemed insignificant in this kind of sea, their eyesight was enough to capture the scene nearby. In front of them, a huge mouth filled with sharp teeth appeared. Even if Silin and the others stacked together, they might not be as big as one of the teeth in this huge mouth. Its appearance gave them a fright. The hair on Huimao's back stood on end, and he almost transformed right away. However, they soon realized that this huge mouth was still, and it was trapped inside by something. Shifting their gazes to the side, they could see the owner of this huge mouth. Without a doubt, this was a giant beast that lived at the bottom of the sea. Its gigantic head, its gigantic body that was submerged in the darkness, and the reflection of some crystals made everything look incredibly strange. The so-called skyscrapers that Silin and the others thought of as undersea city were actually mountains of transparent crystals. No, to be more precise, they were all specimens. Sea beast specimens. These mountain-like crystals were nothing more than sealing these sea beasts inside, sealing away the once living side of these giant deep-sea beasts. Other than the giant beast specimen in front of them, there were also other giant beast specimens of different species around it. Some of the giant beasts sealed inside the crystals were lying on their sides, some were standing, and some were crawling just like the giant beast in front of them. Standing here, Silin and the others felt like they were as small as a speck of dust. Moreover, the faint shadows of Silin and the others were reflected inside the crystals. When they overlapped with the giant beasts inside the crystals, it added a frightening chill to everything. How on earth were these giant crystal mountain sea beast specimens made? The Shi family? Cheto, who wasn't wearing a protective suit, reached out and touched the crystals. After sensing them for a moment, he said, "These crystals have existed for 1,000 years. 1,000 years? Lung and the others were speechless. Who on earth had the ability to seal these giant sea beasts inside crystals in such a harsh environment 1,000 years ago? Silin observed the giant beasts from 1,000 years ago sealed inside the crystal. The creatures inside the crystal were vivid and lifelike, and they were slightly different from the few recorded sea beasts. It could be seen that they were the same species 1,000 years ago, but after 1,000 years, the original species had mutated, and their appearance had changed a little, causing the contrast between the two. This was also due to the special environment of sea heaven. The mutation rate of the sea beasts living in sea heaven was very high, and 1,000 years was enough to cause a lot of changes in many species. What do we do next, young master? Pescado asked. Lung thought for a moment and took out the star map. The light of the key appeared and pointed to a certain direction. When Lung took out the star map, Ingweji, who was in a highly nervous state because of the giant beast specimens in front of him, started breathing heavily. The tear of God. It really is the tear of God. No wonder the young master's behavior was so abnormal, and no wonder he didn't act according to the plan. He had the tear of God's star map. Ingweji looked at Silen. He was sure that Silen was the one who gave the other star map fragment to Lung. He didn't think that a lousy captain of a hunter squad would have a star map, and more importantly, he was willing to take out the star map fragment. Ingweji wasn't the only one who recognized the star map. The others were familiar with Olilo's star map as well. After all, they were all people who followed Lung or Focus around, so it was only natural that they knew some secrets. Their hearts that were originally unsettled because of the giant beast specimens quickly calmed down. For the sake of the tear of God, even if they all died here, they would still help the young master find the tear of God. Let's go. Lung pointed at the direction indicated by the star map and started walking. Silen took 2 steps and saw that Huimao wasn't following him. He turned his head and saw that the guy was lying on top of the seal of the giant beast specimen and was about to take a bite. The corner of Silen's mouth twitched. He raised his hand and grabbed the hair on the back of Huimao's neck and pulled him over. You won't even let go of a sea beast that has been dead for thousands of years? Silen let go of his hand and patted Huimao's head, indicating that Huimao should follow him obediently. The group walked for almost an hour in the mountain of specimens, but they didn't find any other giant beasts. There weren't any living giant beasts in the surrounding area either. However, the detectors that were sent over earlier did find 2 of them. Could it be that those big guys aren't nearby? Pescado looked around and said. As soon as Pescado said this, the person next to him patted his head hard. Do you want to meet one? Pescado shook his head. Not even if you beat me to death. The group followed the direction indicated by the star map and continued to walk forward. They arrived in front of a small protruding hill. This hill wasn't a mountain of crystals. It looked more like it was formed by a protrusion of the seabed's crust. The star map was pointing to this small mountain. The few of them walked around the small mountain and found a closed door in one place. Lung approached with the star map. As he got closer, the light of the key on the star map became brighter. The door opened. The key on the star map was the key to open this door. There should be a large empty space behind the door. After it was opened, seawater gushed in. Silen and Ingweji grabbed Lung, who was almost sucked in. When the seawater finally calmed down, the group walked in. Under the illumination of the fluorescent stone, the empty space behind the door was also revealed. There was nothing unusual. There was nothing else in the 300 square meters space. After the group entered the door automatically closed again. The strange thing was that after the door closed, the seawater in this space was gradually drawn away. A circular opening opened in the middle of the space. A staircase extended from the ground to the top, connecting with an opening in the ceiling above Silen's head. Ingweji took the lead and stepped on the staircase. The group followed behind him. After Ingweji entered the second level, the lighting inside was turned on, showing the scene inside the second level. On the walls of this space, Silen saw some murals. It was the handwriting of the Shi family from 1,000 years ago. Chapter 365. There were many things drawn on the wall, including sea beasts and abstract people. The one thing that convinced Silen that it was the work of the Shi family was the chessboard on the wall. Those who hadn't seen the Chain Stars chessboard would only be confused when they saw the dots of different sizes on the wall, but Silen had seen Shimu's Chain Stars chessboard before. Judging from the chessboard on the wall, this was at least the 7th layer of the chessboard. There was a circular platform on the second floor with a groove in the center. Judging from its size and shape, it was the same as the Olillo's star map fragment. Under the guidance of the others, Lung closed the star map in his hand and placed the Olillo's star map fragment inside. Crack, 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 the circular platform began to rotate, one ring after another, in different directions. Some were clockwise, some were counterclockwise, and the angle of rotation was also different. In the end, when the 9 rings in the circular platform stopped rotating, a painting appeared on the circular platform. It was a sea beast. It looked like an amphibious reptile. However, both Lung and Ingweji said that this sea beast lived in the depths of the ocean. Silen didn't know how they came to this conclusion, but he trusted Lung and Ingweji's opinion. Andryara's data didn't contain any information about this sea beast. They didn't see it on their way down either. What is it trying to express? Lung asked as he looked at the circular platform. Silen glanced at Huimao. The guy's ears were twitching again, but before he could ask anything, a violent tremor interrupted him. What's going on? Is it an earthquake? While they were still in shock, a screen appeared on the circular wall on the second floor. The screen showed the scene outside. At this moment, outside the small mountain, buildings began to rise. They were not sea beast crystal specimens, but real buildings. The surface of the seabed's crust glowed with light, like a road paved in the middle of the rising city. There's really an underwater city. Everyone was shocked by what they saw on the screen. To be able to build a city at the bottom of sea paradise, what kind of ability did one have? As the hemispherical buildings rose, a layer of membrane-like cover spread out from the center of the city, expelling the seawater and making the buried city appear more real. The light barrier spread far and wide, forming a hemispherical shape that covered the area. When everything calmed down once more, the breathing of the people on the second floor of the small mountain began to quicken, especially Lung and the others. It was precisely because they understood the ocean and understood life in the ocean that they knew how difficult it was to achieve such a feat. Perhaps it would be simple in other places, but this was sea heaven. There were countless sea beasts, special magnetic fields, terrible environments, and disruptive substances. Of course, this also made them believe that the tear of God was definitely here. Let's go. Lung took the lead and walked downstairs. Ingweji and the others followed. Silen looked at Huimao, whose ears were perked up from time to time, and asked, "What did you find?" "I don't know. I keep feeling like there's something around here, but my perception has decreased here." "I'm not sure what it is," Huimao answered. "Machine?" "No, it's some kind of living creature. It's alive." While saying this, Whis clenched its paws and opened and closed its paws. "There's a very large mechanical structure underground," Cheto said while looking around, "and the energy supply here should be geothermal energy." Silen didn't doubt Cheto's analysis. At the same time, he admired the Shi family's abilities even more. They really were the peak generation that even the gods were jealous of. "Let's go and take a look." By the time Silen, Cheto, and Huimao walked out of the small mountain, Lung and the others had already taken off their breathing masks. "The air composition here is almost the same as the air at sea. Even the pressure is the same," Lung said to Silen. Now that they were illuminated from the ground, they didn't need the fluorescent stones anymore. The place was much brighter than before, and they could see everything clearly. "It should be possible. There must be a way to control the air composition and pressure here," Silen said while looking at the buildings rising from the ground. These buildings were of different sizes, but they were all hemispherical in shape. Moreover, they looked like ordinary stones that weren't transparent. They couldn't see inside or find an entrance. Lung wanted to find the tear of God, but he didn't know where to start. The buildings looked the same, and he couldn't cut them with a knife. At best, he could leave a few shallow scratches. Silen took off his breathing mask and protective suit. Then, he touched a hemispherical building with his finger. "This building contains DH50 black ore," Silen said while feeling the information transmitted to his fingertip. He couldn't help but marvel at the similar buildings around him. To think that they could use so much of such rare DH50 black ore. It was obvious that Sea Heaven had a lot of DH50. The machines inside are moving, Cheto said. He could sense the machines inside the hemispherical buildings clearly. Sillin had obviously sensed it when he touched the buildings just now. These buildings are just like houses and skyscrapers. There must be an entrance somewhere. I can't help but feel that since the creator built a city here, it wouldn't just look like this. Young master. Come over here. Not far away, Ingweji called out to Lung in a low voice. There was urgency and anxiety in his voice. Sillin didn't move from his spot. Huimao's claws on his shoulder were retracting subconsciously again. Every time Huimao acted like this, it meant that he had sensed the presence of prey. Lung walked over and saw something. Suddenly, he turned around and looked around before fixing his gaze on Sillin. Sillin. Watch out. The moment Lung said the first word, Sillin felt something pouncing at him from behind. It was so fast that it was almost impossible to detect its presence. In fact, it was as if it were a shadow. Before Sillin could move, Huimao was about to extend his claws, and Cheto was ready to fight. However, the thing suddenly stopped 5 meters away from Sillin. It made a few rustling noises, but it didn't charge at him. Sillin saw the thing's appearance clearly now. It was about 15 meters long, had 4 limbs, and a long tail. Its body was almost black, and it didn't have any scales. However, it gave off a tough and impenetrable feeling. Its eyes were the same color as the sea, and it had no pupils. However, its emotions could be seen from the depths of its eyes. There were folds of skin around their necks, and when they pounced at Cheto, their skin folds would shrink tightly against their necks. However, the black fellow in front of them had spread open like an umbrella. It was a very strange species. Marauders. Lung and the others took out their weapons. Energy guns weren't very useful in this place, so they could only use bullets. They also took out their blades. The Andryra family would send an expedition team to see paradise every couple of years or decades. Of course, they wouldn't go deep into the sea like Lung did this time. Sometimes, they would only observe from near the surface or in the air. However, the expedition team had only captured an image of this creature once in the past few years. They hadn't seen it again after that. They were incredibly fast, and the only time they captured an image was when 3 of them forced a middle sea beast out of the sea and killed it. The claws of the predator were far sharper than they looked, and with their advantage in speed, they could easily kill a creature that was nearly 100 times larger than them, and the prey couldn't even touch the predator. Only the core members of the Andryra family had seen images of the marauders back then. Lung and Ingweji were the only ones who had seen the images. The rest of them hadn't. Ingweji had seen a faint claw mark on the wall of a building just now. It was very similar to the claw marks of the marauders in his memory. That was why he was so anxious. The group of people who had captured the marauders tried to tame them, but they didn't even bat an eyelid and continued to hunt the large sea beast. After Lung saw the claw mark, he began to pay attention to his surroundings. They had the advantage of being human, so they were much more sensitive to aquatic creatures than other races. When he sensed that there was a marauder behind Sillin, Lung hurriedly called out to warn them. However, neither Lung nor Ingweji had expected such a scene to occur. Why did the marauders stop? Lung asked Ingweji in a low voice. They didn't dare move recklessly, and they didn't dare to move too much either. That would make the marauders feel threatened and go berserk. That would be even harder to deal with. Ingweji didn't understand either. According to the Andryra family's records of the marauders, they were all very cruel. Once they started killing, they wouldn't stop until their prey was dead. According to the Andryra family's analysis, the marauders probably didn't have any natural enemies in this world. Regardless of whether their speculation was correct or not, they were all very curious as to why the marauder had suddenly stopped when it was clearly charging at them. Sillin patted Huimao, who was itching for action, and told him to hold back for now. After observing the black fellow not far away from him for a moment, Silen suddenly thought of something and took out the gray cat's incredibly precious leather ball. Meow, Silen, why did you take out my ball? Hui Mao hurriedly reached out to protect the ball. It was impossible to find a ball like this in the entire League of Stars, and it was extremely rare even in the Mist Bodhisattva sect. After all, no one would go and ask that giant viper to make another one, right? Let go, I'm just doing an experiment. If you don't let go, what if that black fellow scratches it? Silen noticed that the marauder in front of him had become even more vigilant as he watched Hui Mao protect the ball with its claws. Silen pulled at the ball in his hand and saw that it wouldn't budge, so he said to Hui Mao, why don't you play around here? That black fellow seems to be afraid of that 1,000-year-old viper's skin. Hui Mao flicked its ears and looked at the marauder that was baring its teeth and opening and closing the folds of its skin on its neck. It looked at them warily and hooked the ball with its claws. After it hit the building, Hui Mao jumped up and firmly hooked the ball with its tail. During this process, the marauder in Lung's mouth moved its gaze along with the ball. It even took a few steps back and growled warily when the ball was thrown. Lung and the others finally realized what was going on. Ing Weiji shot Lung a look. What's that thing in that kid's hand? Lung, I don't know either. While everyone was paying attention to the marauder, Cheto moved around to the back of a building in a flash. While Cheto was moving, another black shadow flashed around the building. It was another marauder. Wait. Wait. We mean no harm. Don't kill me or it. A strange voice came from behind the building. It definitely wasn't Cheto's voice. There's someone else. Lung motioned for the others to go over and take a look. The marauder in front of Silen gave up on Silen the moment it heard the voice. It flashed and charged over. When Silen walked over, Lung, Ing Weiji, and the others were looking at Cheto strangely. Cheto was holding a person in his hand. He didn't look like a normal human, but he did look a lot like one. There was a marauder on each side of him. They were staring at Cheto like a tiger watching its prey. As for Cheto, a marauder was biting him from head to toe all the way to his abdomen. Cheto's outstretched arm was blocking the bite, so the marauder couldn't swallow him any further. The person Cheto was holding slapped the head of the marauder holding Cheto and urged, let go now. The marauder let out a few rustles of dissatisfaction before letting go and retreating to the person's side. Cheto's upper body was finally exposed, and there were teeth holes all the way from his abdomen to his head. Just how many rows of teeth did a marauder have in its mouth? It was as if a two-sided needle board had clamped down on Cheto's head. Ing Weiji and the others quickly discovered that there was no blood on Cheto at all. The holes on Lung's body quickly closed and returned to their original state under the group's wide-eyed gazes. It was as if the person who was almost swallowed just now wasn't him. Who are you? Silen asked. The person scratched his finger-thick hair with a webbed hand and said a little bashfully, my name is Korea. Everyone calls me Sai Sai. His one sentence revealed a lot of information. This person knew the common language of the League of Stars, and his tone carried a Sector H dialect. Secondly, he said everyone, meaning that there were other people here besides him. Thirdly, this person and his accomplices were very likely residents of this underwater city, and they were very familiar with the marauders. Seeing that Silen and the others didn't react, Korea said a little vexedly, I really didn't do it on purpose. I was just curious. Silen motioned for Cheto to put Korea down before saying, we mean no harm. You can have your companions put down their weapons now. Lung also motioned for his subordinates to put down their weapons. Korea looked at Silen and then at the others. Then, he scratched his webbed right hand with his left hand, thought for a moment, and waved at the buildings. Not long after, the buildings were no longer the monotonous hemispherical shape they were before. Some parts of the buildings had become transparent like windows, and there were a few people who looked similar to Korea lying on the ground next to the windows. They were all armed. The person lying on the window of one of the buildings shouted at them, Sai Sai, ask them if they are intruders without keys. If they are, ask the guards to kill them. Sillin and the others. Didn't he find it strange that Bright Truth would shout something like this? Korea turned to look at Sillin and the others. About that, are you intruders without keys? Lung covered his face. Are the creatures here really so intelligent? After adjusting his emotions, Lung answered, I brought the key here. It's right there. Lung pointed at the direction of the hill. I couldn't have turned this place into this without the key. You guys were living underground before this, right? Korea nodded hurriedly and said excitedly, yes, we were living underground before this. I heard that this is the first time this city has risen up since it retracted into the ground. Hey, they really did bring the key here. Korea waved at the buildings and shouted. After receiving confirmation, a door opened on the hemispherical buildings, and the people inside walked out. Most of them looked young. There was expectation in their eyes, as if they were looking forward to something. After these people walked out, a couple of predators ran over to them. These people seemed to be very familiar with the predators. Looking at the ferocious fellows wagging their tails like pet dogs, Lung felt a sense of absurdity. He always thought that no one could tame a high-level sea beast that tamers couldn't. But what was up with these people? Lung shook his head and looked at Chedo. He pinched him curiously and elbowed him. How did it feel to be half-eaten by a predator just now? Chedo thought for a moment before answering, bad breath. Lung. That was a pretty good experience. While Sillin and the others were thinking about what to do next, the people who were approaching them parted to make a path for them. An old man of the same race as Korea ran over with a bottle in his hand. The bottle made Lung's heart beat faster unconsciously. Could it be? The old man ran over and looked at Sillin and the others. Then, his gaze stopped on Lung and the others. Are you looking for the Tear of Gods? Yes. Lung was a little confused by the direct question. Who wants the Tear of Gods? Me. Lung pointed at himself. Here. The old man passed the bottle to Lung and looked at him expectantly. Drink it. This is the Tear of Gods. Ingweji and the others looked at the old man suspiciously, but at the same time, they also felt that the thing in the bottle seemed to be communicating with them. There was a sense of intimacy, just like how they communicated with sea beasts after they tamed them. Lung stopped Ingweji from inspecting the bottle and accepted it. He said to the old man, I heard that the Tear of Gods grants its user the ability to reform sea beasts. Yes, that is true. But I also heard that those who use the Tear of Gods only have a certain chance of success. Yes, that is true. What if they fail? The old man smiled kindly. They will die. Lung. Chapter 366. Lung didn't drink the contents of the bottle immediately. Even if the contents were extremely tempting, he couldn't act rashly until he understood the situation. Who were these people? Why did they live in this underwater city? Everything was still up in the air. Sillin looked at the people around him and the people who were leaning against the windows of other buildings and looking at them. There were almost 300 people who had shown themselves already. The city was huge, but the population was far too sparse compared to its size. What's your relationship with the Shi family? Sillin asked. The old man was originally a little anxious because Lung did not drink the bottle, but when he heard Sillin's words, the old man's expression froze. It wasn't just the old man, even the group of onlookers around them revealed surprised expressions. Sillin didn't tell Lung too much about the Shi family. He only mentioned that Olilo was somewhat related to the Shi family, and Lung's subordinates. Even Ingweji, who had served Andriera Phocos for a long time, didn't know much about them. Now that Sillin had mentioned it, he was a little curious. After a moment of surprise, the old man looked respectful. It wasn't towards Sillin, but towards the Shi family that Sillin mentioned. The Shi family is our benefactor. Benefactor? Yes. If it wasn't for the Shi family's help, our ancestors might not have survived that disaster 1,000 years ago, and we wouldn't be here today. The eyes of the old man and the people around him were more like those of believers. Lung suddenly thought of something and asked, "May I know your surname?" "We don't have a surname, but we can be called Mill if we really have to." "Mill?" Ingweji, Pescado, and the others' jaws almost hit the ground when they heard this. The Mill family. The Mill family that only existed in historical records could be found, but no more information could be found. The Mill family that only existed in legends was said by critics to be a combination of a genius and idiot. Silen had learned a little about the Mill family from the books he read about Sector H's history. The Mill family could be considered an ancient family of Sector H. Moreover, every member of this family was an excellent trainer. They didn't even need special training. Some of the children of the Mill family could already play with the huge sea monsters in the sea before they could even run. Now, many people did not believe that the race had that kind of ability. After all, those things only existed in legends. Moreover, there was no video or graphic evidence. Those evidence had disappeared with the extinction of the Mill family 1,000 years ago. However, Lung and the others had always believed in it. In some of the internal records of the Andryara family, some of the matters regarding the Mir family had been personally written by Andryara's ancestors back then. Because of that, when Lung heard that these people were from the Mill family, he was quite astonished. According to the records of Andryara's ancestors, Mill wasn't their surname, but the name of their race. According to the ancient language of the race, Mill meant sea. The Mill family belonged to a special race among the natives of Sector H. Their minds were pure and stubborn. Their one-track-minded nature caused them to offend a lot of people. Just like the critics said, this race was a combination of a genius and idiot. Their talent allowed them to communicate with the sea monsters almost unimpeded, but they also made mistakes every once in a while and offended a lot of people unintentionally. They didn't know how to curry favor with those in power, they didn't know how to be reserved, and they didn't know how to read people's expressions. They were like an anomaly among the human race, and the reason they were wiped out 1,000 years ago was because they accidentally offended someone and were forced into space. From the looks of it now, the Mill family wasn't completely wiped out back then. Some of them were saved by the Shi family. At the same time, a lot of evidence and deeds of the Mill family had been erased by the peak generation of the Shi family. Lung and the others looked carefully at the people around them. To think that the people who were confirmed to be wiped out 1,000 years ago, were hiding in such an unimaginable place. Seeing that more and more people were walking towards them, Silen suggested, "Let's find a place to talk." Yes, we should find a place to talk." After saying that, the old man turned around and left. He did not even say the word "please," nor did he make a gesture for Celine and the others to follow him. He simply turned around and left on his own. After walking a few steps, the old man turned around and said in dissatisfaction, "Why don't you follow me?" Lung tilted his chin at them and told them to follow him. You can't look at the Mill people from the perspective of a normal person. The old man led Silen and the others into a hemispherical building. The furnishings inside were very simple, and most of them were made of stone. They were extremely rare stone ores, no less. After entering through the door and passing through the living room, Huimao, who was crouching on Silen's shoulder, saw a couple of ores that were extremely expensive in the League of Stars. He wanted nothing more than to rush forward and gather them all into his arms. They were all fish biscuits. So many fish biscuits. The layout was simple and could even be described as monotonous, but the technology behind it was amazing. How could they not be amazed that Sea Heaven was able to use intelligent automation technology? Moreover, this was 1,000 years ago. With the Mill people's talent in electronics, there was no way they could have made something like this. Inside the old man's living room, Silen and the others roughly understood the cause and effect of the incident. Back then, the Shi family wanted to research sea beasts and trainers, so they came to Sector H in search of research subjects and a suitable environment. Coincidentally, they ran into the Mill people who were being wiped out at the time, and the total number of Mill people they saved at the time was less than 30. Although the population of this race wasn't large to begin with, the abrupt drop from hundreds to less than 30 was a devastating blow. The Shi clan helped the Mi people take revenge by bringing their enemies to see heaven, letting the Mi people deal with the culprits who had almost caused their entire clan to be exterminated. In the end, the Mill people who survived made their enemies fall into the stomachs of sea beasts. After that, the Shi family began to build an underwater city here. They invented anti-interference technology, but it was only partially anti-interference. Building a city like this under the sea was already their limit, and they couldn't incorporate any more technology into this place. The special environment here caused most technology to be rejected. Fortunately, the underwater city was built successfully, and the Shi family's research was successfully completed. After that, the Shi family left this underwater world to the Mill people. However, in order to repay the debt of gratitude, the newly elected chief of the Mir people promised to guard this place with his people until the Tear of God was found. Only when the Tear of God welcomed its next master would the Mill people leave this underwater city. They were willing to be the guards of the Tear of God. This guard lasted for 1,000 years. They stayed at the bottom of the sea and befriended the predators that Lung mentioned. These sea beasts didn't actually leave the deep sea area, but for the sake of the Mill people, they would go to the surface and bring some souvenirs, allowing the Mill people to come into contact with the surface of the sea and the things on the surface. The old man pointed at the bottle in Lung's hand and said, "Now that you're here, we can rest assured after you consume the Tear of God and successfully evolve." "You didn't use this?" Lung asked. "No." The old man said matter-of-factly, "It wasn't prepared for us anyway." Pescado and the others had a strange look on their faces. As expected, the Mill people were just like the legends said. They really didn't know what to say about them. If it was anyone else, they would have drunk the Tear of God 800 years ago, no, perhaps as soon as the Shi family left. "You guys, don't you have any thoughts?" "This is the Tear of God, the Tear of God," Pescado emphasized. The old man was a little angry. He felt that Pescado was looking down on his intelligence. He unhappily patted the table that was worth a whole aircraft's worth of fish biscuits in Huemao's eyes. "I know. Our clan has guarded it for nearly 1,000 years. As the current clan leader and the person who inherited the Tear of God, do you think I don't know better than you?" "You know nothing." Pescado and the others cursed silently. The Tear of God, there was a passage in the creation myth that said, when the Tear of God fell into the sea, the creatures in the sea were influenced and offered their loyalty. That was a treasure that could control countless sea beasts, including those overlords in the sea. What a treasure! How could these people not have any thoughts? It was fine if it was just one person, but this was an entire clan that had lived for generations until now. Were their brains filled with shit from constipation? How could it make people feel so anxious? Cough. Lung patted the uncontrollable twitch on his face. He couldn't blame them. As a businessman, he couldn't imagine the combination of nerves in the brains of the Mir people. In order not to dwell on this problem, Lung asked, "Mr. Chief, in the records of my ancestors, you Mir people don't seem to look like this." "Oh, this, of course it's a mutation. The natural environment of the sea paradise has greatly increased the mutation rate. There will be some changes in almost every generation." Chief Mir raised his hand and moved his webbed fingers. As he moved his fingers, the webbing on his hand gradually shrunk. Other parts of his hand also changed. Soon, Chief Mir's hand looked similar to the fingers of adults like Silan and the others. Back then, the Mir people didn't have webbing on their hands. However, after living here for nearly 1,000 years, the Mir people had mutated from generation to generation, and there were many changes. It wasn't just the webbing on their hands. There were also many differences in their thick hair, body shape, and bone structure. These were all due to mutation. So, after 1,000 years, we are slightly different from our ancestors. Chief Mir had a smug look on his face. Pescado and the others lowered their heads so that Chief Mir wouldn't see their twitching expressions. What was there to be smug about? What was there to be smug about after staying here for 1,000 years? However, Chief Mir's expression became a little sad again. The birth rate of our Mir people has dropped a lot. After so many generations, there are only 476 people now. After a moment of silence, Lung shook the bottle in his hand. Is this all there is of the tear of God? Yes, yes. This is all there is, and it's only enough for one person, Chief Mir answered. Silan realized that Chief Mir liked to say the word yes. Was this an affirmation of the double superposition table? Just as Lung was feeling a little regretful, Chief Mir continued, the mutation caused by the tear of God is a hereditary mutation. However, there is a certain probability. If your mutation is successful, some of your descendants might inherit this mutation, or they might not. As long as there was a probability of inheriting it, Lung felt much better. I would also like to ask, what is the probability of successful mutation after consuming the tear of God? Chief Mir thought for a moment. As far as I know, according to the current records, it's 100%. Hearing that it was 100%, Ingweji, Pescado, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. However, before they could catch their breaths, Chief Mir scratched his webbed hand and said, back then, only one person from the Shi family used it, and he succeeded. If that's the case, it's indeed 100%. Ingweji and the others, what kind of 100% is this? Seriously, continue to be anxious. Oh, there's one more thing I need to tell you. There's only one way for you to get out. Even the Shi family used that method to get out. What method? The few of them unconsciously sat up straight. Chief Mir calmly played with his white hair that was as thick as a finger. We'll have to wait until he successfully evolves. Everyone, this was really making them anxious. No wonder so many people wanted to kill the Mir people back then. Back then, when the Shi family researched the common frequency, they discovered that even if it's the same wavelength, mechanical instruments can't achieve the same effect as humans. That's why I said that there's only one way for you to get out of the sea. Forget it, I've said enough. Our entire family is looking forward to your successful mutation. Ingweji's serious expression had been broken countless times today. He still had many things that he didn't understand, but this damned old man in front of him said that he had said enough. 10 minutes later, Lung prepared himself mentally and drank the tear of God in the bottle. Then, he collapsed. The old man said that it was a normal phenomenon and even took out a manual from 1,000 years ago. The manual listed the phenomenon of successful mutation, as well as the various scenarios of failure. Ingweji's hands were trembling as he held on to the instruction manual. The signs of failure were simply too frightening. There wasn't even a complete corpse. Ingweji didn't dare to imagine what kind of shock the entire Andrea family would experience if his young master failed. Long was waiting at the old man's house. According to Silan's observation, Long's body temperature rose and fell drastically, and he looked like he was in pain, but there were obvious signs of life. It should be a good sign. An hour later, Long's fluctuating body temperature stabilized, but he still didn't wake up. According to the manual, he was undergoing an advantageous mutation, not one of those scenarios of failure. This allowed everyone's tense nerves to finally relax. Ingweji and the others waited at the old man's house for their young master to wake up. Huimao couldn't stay idle and wanted to go out for a stroll. Silan was worried about him, so he asked Cheto to stay and observe Long's situation. Then, he left the old man's house with Huimao. Silan took out a bag of biscuits for Huimao to grind his teeth and walked inside this underwater city. This was a very simple city, and it was inhabited by people with simple minds. Even the dark blue sea water of the sea paradise that struck fear into people's hearts was pure and clear to them, wasn't it? The Mir people lived their lives simply and resolutely. They guarded that bottle of God's tear with pure hearts, but at the same time, they had a hazy yearning for the life outside the sea that every generation had spoken of. This yearning reached its peak after Silan's group arrived. However, even if they yearned for it, they still kept the determination in their hearts and willingly guarded this place until the person who obtained the God's tear appeared. There was no doubt that the mere people were absolute geniuses when it came to taming sea beasts. They were even more talented than Long and the others. However, they couldn't escape the misfortune brought about by their own shortcomings. Even though they were a member of the human race, they couldn't integrate into human society. Under the accumulation of contradictions, the extinction of their race suddenly came. Even the strongest tamer couldn't come into contact with the sea creatures and the spirituality of the sea when they were in outer space. In a situation where their attack power was already reduced, and they possessed relatively backward technology and martial strength, how could they fight against others? Protectors. The mere people needed a protector. In the past, it was the She family. After today, perhaps, the Andryara family would take over this task. However, the Andryara family was a merchant family. Even if Long sincerely protected this family, what about in the future? What about the rest of the Andryara family? Sillin raised his head. The light barrier above the city isolated the water. The undersea city rippled with light and shadow, bringing with it a deep and ancient poetic feeling. Hey, isn't that the fellow called Sai Sai? Hui Mao raised his claw and patted Sillin's face, pointing in a direction. Sillin looked over and saw that Celia was brushing the tongue of a marauder. The marauder was lying there obediently with its tongue sticking out, and Celia was using a brush that was even bigger than a mop to brush its tongue. The marauder was so comfortable that it was squinting its eyes in satisfaction. Could it be that all sea beasts like to brush their tongues? Sillin remembered that Blue Skin seemed to have this hobby as well. Seeing Sillin, Sai Sai became excited. The brush poked into a certain part of the sea beast's mouth. Discontentedly, it used its tongue to roll up the big brush and used the other end to hit Sai Sai's head, causing Sai Sai to jump left and right to avoid it. Although he was throwing a little tantrum, this way of getting along was really harmonious. Hui Mao used his claw to pick up a few fish biscuits and threw them into the sea beast's mouth. He also threw a few to Sai Sai and said generously, "I'll treat you guys to some fish biscuits." It was just a few pieces of fish biscuits. To that big sea beast, it probably couldn't even taste them. However, Sai Sai liked it very much. Looking at Sai Sai, who was eating happily, Sillin was really embarrassed to tell him that it was just pet cat food. You guys have a good relationship. Very few humans and sea beasts can get along like this. Sillin said. Even if it was a tamer, they would mostly use sea beasts as a kind of weapon. They wouldn't get along like Sai Sai and the others. Sai Sai bit the fish biscuit and said incoherently, "Because we see ourselves as one of these sea beasts. We're all friends." As he said this, he looked at Hui Mao again, because the fish biscuits Hui Mao gave him had already been eaten. Chapter 367. Seeing that Celia was looking at the bag of fish biscuits she was holding in her arms, Hui Mao clenched his fists tightly. He had a conflicted look on his face, but in the end, he still opened the bag and gave some to Celia. As for the big sea beast, it did not taste the fish biscuits at all. It was not the least bit interested in the fish biscuits in Hui Mao's hands. It was now playing with a big brush with its tongue. Celia stretched out her webbing to make it easier for her to hold the fish biscuits. Looking at Celia, who was eating happily, Sillin asked, "Celia, have you been living underground all this time? Before we came here, this city had never risen." "That's true." Celia chewed on the fish biscuit in her mouth and replied, "According to the records, my ancestors and I have always lived in the underground city. Only when the key appears can the city rise again. So, for thousands of years, we have been living underground. Sometimes, when we are bored, we will come out and take a stroll around the city." "Swim around? Do we need to wear protective clothing or something like that when we come out to swim?" Sillin asked. "What do you need to wear to swim? Isn't it just walking out of the house and playing around for a while before going home? What's a protective suit?" Celia was confused. "Nothing, it's just a swimming suit worn by ordinary people." Can you mill people come out to swim directly? Can you swim freely at the bottom of the sea? Celia stuffed all the fish biscuits into her mouth, then scratched her hand and said, I heard that in the beginning, we could not. We could only stay in the city's defense circle. The later generation could go out to swim, but they did not stay outside for long. Finally, when it came to our generation, we could almost swim freely outside. Scylla was a little surprised. It seemed that the mill people did not stay in the sea for 1,000 years for nothing. The beneficial mutation of their bodies made them more suitable for living in the deep sea. Since you can come out to swim, where have you been? There should be a lot of giant beasts at the bottom of the sea, just like those sea beasts that I have seen sealed in crystals. Aren't you afraid? This city will emit a sound wave that humans can't hear. Those giant beasts are more sensitive to this sound wave, so they won't approach this area. Korea recited the passage from his memory as if he was reciting a book. He did not know anything about sound waves or sensitivity. All he could do was to recite the passage. Scylla raised his head and looked outside the light shield. Just now, there was a big sea beast swimming past the light shield, but it didn't continue to approach this place. This was probably the reason why the sea beasts had retreated when Cheto was talking about. At the same time, Scylla also learned from Cheto's analysis that there were other reasons that paralyzed the spaceplane they were on. This was probably what the Shi family had done to prevent the aliens from coming here to cause trouble. Yes, because of this, we didn't dare to go too far. In addition, there's a trench next to the city. It's very dangerous there, so the elders didn't allow us to go near it. As for those sea beasts sealed in crystals, I heard that they came to cause trouble when the city was being built, so they were sealed inside by our benefactors. Cheto's eyes were filled with admiration when he talked about the sealed sea beasts. The crystals weren't enclosed inside the light shield, so they weren't considered part of this underwater city. That being said, it was extremely difficult for the Shi family to achieve this. They must have used some special methods. Judging from Cheto's expression, he probably didn't know how the giant sea beasts were sealed inside the crystals in the first place. Scylla thinks for a moment before asking, where's the trench you mentioned? Here, it's over there. It's next to the protective shield. Scylla asked Cheto to lead the way. He wanted to go there and take a look in exchange for a batch of fish biscuits. Although Cheto was very afraid of the trench, a batch of fish biscuits in exchange wasn't a bad deal. Besides, he was only going to take a look at the light shield. He wouldn't go too far, so there shouldn't be any danger. The trench that Cheto was talking about was right next to the city. Scylla could see it through the light shield. Looking at the trench from the city inside the light shield, it felt as if the city was sitting on the edge of a cliff. There was actually some distance between the edge of the city and the trench, but this distance was nothing compared to the extremely wide trench. According to Cheto, the predators that Lung mentioned were the creatures that lived in this trench. The Mir people called them guardians, not predators, as the people of the Andryra family called them. This was because these sea beasts got along very well with the Mir people here, and they would also help to guard the waters around the city. Even though these sea beasts were the smallest in size among the underwater creatures, they were very strong. Moreover, they often lived in groups. Even some of the larger sea beasts wouldn't take the initiative to provoke them. Because of this, the Mir people had been living here peacefully for nearly 1,000 years. Mir said that there were many sea beasts in the trench, and their tempers were generally not good. The guardians' tempers were considered the best, and they were the easiest to get along with. However, other than the guardians and a few sea beasts that were accepted by the Mir people, the sea beasts in the trench would not go near this city. There's a big guy here. We don't dare to provoke it. According to the elders, that guy is very annoying. It often snores, and it makes us feel like there's an earthquake there, Cheto complained. Big guy. Yes, there will be a tremor every few years. I have never seen the real appearance of that big guy, but the chief has a record of it. When we were receiving education, the chief showed it to us. Cheto shook her head and told Scylla about the education they received when they were young. However, the more Silen listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. He interrupted Cheto and asked, "When did you receive your education?" Cheto thought for a moment and replied, "Starting from the age of 5, until we were 20. We need to learn a lot of things. It's very annoying." "How old are you now?" "I'm very young now, only 51 years old. Don't look down on me because I'm short. My mother said that I'm not an adult yet, so I can continue to grow." Saying this, Cheto showed off his biceps. Silen was speechless. "How old do you become an adult at?" Silen asked. "It's hard to say. A long time ago, the rule was 20 years old. Later, it became 30, and now, the chief set it at 60. Because our lifespan has increased, we should be 300 years old." "Yes, that's what the chief said." Cheto was still immersed in the joy of being able to continue to grow. In fact, the current mere people were already taller than ordinary people. Standing in front of Cheto, Silen was shorter than him by 2 heads. As they were talking, the sea beast that Cheto helped to brush its tongue slowly crawled out of the light shield. It passed through the light shield that isolated the water layer, and then began to play happily in the sea outside. Looking at the sea beast swimming happily outside, Cheto also began to itch. There shouldn't be any danger, right? Silen saw that after Cheto passed through the light shield, his 2 legs merged together, forming a fishtail structure. Some fins appeared on his body, and his 2 arms also changed. A layer of membrane formed over their eyes to protect them, so that they could better play in the sea. Now, Cheto was more like a pure underwater resident. Just like what he said, most of the time, they thought of themselves as sea beasts. Entering the sea environment, Cheto was chasing and playing with the guardian sea beast. Although his speed was not as fast as the sea beast, compared to many people who were good at swimming, he was already very fast. Huimao gave the fish biscuit to Silen for safekeeping, and then jumped out to swim with the 2 sea beasts. However, 5 minutes later, the sea monster that was playing with Korea suddenly swallowed Korea into its mouth, and then hurriedly swam towards the city. After entering the light shield, it spat Korea out. "What's wrong? Is there danger?" After Cheto came out of its mouth, he didn't care about the water on his body, and looked outside the light shield. On the other side, a tentacle stretched out from the trench, and Huimao, who was standing there motionless, was wrapped up like an ant. Cheto anxiously patted the guardian sea beast next to him, asking it to go over and help. However, before it could move its feet, the huge tentacle that was wrapped around Huimao outside the light shield was broken into pieces. Cheto and the sea beast were stunned, especially the guardian sea beast, its tail stiffened. Perhaps it didn't expect that the little fat cat would have such a strong combat power. The owner of the tentacle gradually emerged from the trench, and the other tentacles also stretched out. However, now it didn't care about the little thing that had cut off its tentacle, and instead, it swam upstream as if it was running for its life. Woo! The deep roar was full of deterrence, and the sound waves hit the light, creating ripples. A huge mouth emerged from the trench, biting the tentacle monster that was trying to escape, and then sank down, dragging the prey in its mouth. The tentacle monster couldn't break free no matter how hard it struggled. Silen saw that the huge mouth was only partially exposed, and not even its head was completely exposed. However, this was enough for Silen to see how powerful the creatures in the trench were. Although the 2 of them were bigger than the other, they were nothing compared to the size of the trench. This trench was like a passage to another world, and it made people flinch. Cheto patted her chest, still a little nervous. As expected, we can't get close to that trench. If it was just those guardians, they had enough perception and speed to escape from the sea beasts they couldn't handle. However, the Myrians couldn't, so every time the Myrians went out, they would bring these guardians with them. After so many years, they had built up a solid trust between them. Just like how he didn't worry or fear when Cheto was directly swallowed into the guardian's mouth. When Huimao returned to the city, Cheto's eyes were looking at it strangely, as if she was looking at an expert. "Silen, Lung is awake." Cheto sent a message. After receiving Cheto's message, Silan grabbed Huimao and ran to the old chief's house. Seeing Silan running to the chief's house, Cheto also followed. Although he wasn't very smart, he knew that it was about the person who consumed the tear of God. It worked. Didn't that mean they could go out and play now? At the old chief's house, Lung was sitting on the stone bed. His complexion was a little bad, but his eyes were full of excitement. Ingweji was very happy that Lung had woken up, but his young master had been sitting silently ever since he woke up. No one knew what he was thinking. Had the tear of God worked? Why did it look like nothing had changed? Young master, do you feel unwell? Ingweji asked. Lung pinched his throat, furrowed his brows, and then relaxed them. Then, he had a conflicted expression on his face, and then his face lit up with joy. Lung's expression kept changing. Ingweji and the other subordinates were really anxious to death, but they didn't want to rush him. They had no experience with this at all. They looked at the clan elder, but the old man was also at a loss. The manual didn't say anything about what would happen to the person who woke up. I'm fine. After a long silence, Lung finally said those 3 words. The first word sounded a little strange, the second word was a little stiff, but everything returned to normal by the third word. Silan happened to hear Lung's voice when he came in. He looked at Lung and asked, "Did something happen to your throat?" Lung nodded and pinched his throat again. He couldn't help but smile. "I'm not used to it yet, but I'll get used to it very soon." "Young master, did something happen to your throat?" Ingweji asked. Lung cleared his throat and answered, "The second sound." The second sound? Ingweji and the others were confused. However, when the old chief heard it, he slapped his thigh. Yes, that's it. I heard that people who successfully mutate will have a second sound. That seems to be the case. The old chief took out an old-fashioned record book and flipped through it. The first sound is your old one. It's used to talk to people, and the second sound is used to communicate with sea beasts. Then how different are they from us tamers? Pescado asked. Tamers could tame many sea beasts without making a sound. If it was just the sound, it didn't sound like much. The chief looked at Pescado with disdain and pointed at the guardian sea beast behind Syria, who was peeking at the door. Didn't you say that you can't tame them? If you can't even tame a guardian with such a gentle temperament, then you can't tame the other sea beasts in the trench. I guess you can only tame some small fish in the middle and upper seas. Those guys are gentle. Gentle my ass. Small fish. Small fish, you kick. The old chief's words were very infuriating. Ingweji and the others were very dissatisfied, especially when they heard the old chief's tone. It really made them want to slap him. However, the old chief's words did explain a lot of problems. The old chief didn't care about the dissatisfied looks of Ingweji and the others. He continued, if he successfully mutated and created a second sound, then he can communicate with that guy in the trench and let it send you back to the surface. That guy? Lung was confused. Silan thinks that the guy the old chief was talking about was probably the sea beast in the trench that Syria mentioned. How do you feel now? The old chief asked Lung. I'm fine. Lung pinched his throat again. Then go outside and try it. However, before you can be sure that you can control the second sound, don't go to the trench. Okay. Lung couldn't wait to give it a try. Ever since he successfully mutated and created a second sound, he felt much closer to this sea. He always felt that he could understand the creatures in this sea better. Lung first tried it in the sea on the opposite side of the city and the trench. This time, the evolution was successful. Not only did he have a second sound, his body's affinity with the sea environment had also greatly increased. He felt like he was a sea beast living here, able to breathe freely and swim freely in the deep sea. Now, he was completely capable of swimming to the surface. However, Lung definitely wouldn't leave the others behind and run away by himself. The results of the first test were not bad. Lung made a nearby sea beast come over obediently. It automatically stuck out its tongue and swung it twice. That guy even rolled a few times as if it was playing a treasure, as if it was acting cute. Looking at the sea beast acting cute in front of Lung, Huimao, who was squatting on Silen's shoulder, squinted its eyes and said disdainfully, "How dare you?" Silen glanced at it and didn't say anything. This cat had probably forgotten that it was also an immoral creature. After testing out a couple of sea beasts, Lung finally arrived at a certain part of the oceanic trench under the guidance of the old clan elder. This place wasn't far from where Silen had been earlier, but there was a stone platform here. The mere people in the city all gathered here. They wanted to witness this historical moment with their own eyes. After this, they would be able to put down the responsibilities and burdens in their hearts and go sightseeing on the surface. Lung stood on the platform. Ingweiji and the others looked at their young master without blinking. How proud, how fucking proud. This was Andryra's successor, a true and indisputable successor. Lung followed the records in the elder's old notebook. After adjusting his state, he began to communicate with the guy in the trench. After Lung finished communicating, everyone held their breath and waited for what would happen next. Bang! Following the sound that came from the trench, the surrounding Earth's crust trembled. The group looked around and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. However, the guards were all lowering their heads and sticking close to the ground. Their bodies were trembling, and even the folds of skin that they habitually spread out when they encountered danger were wilting. Their eyes were filled with fear, and their mouths were making muffled sounds. They didn't look as imposing as before. Look! One of the mere people pointed in the trench. There, a group of bubbles floated up. They were densely packed, almost filling up the entire trench. Such a large number was truly spectacular. Huimao, who was squatting on Silen's shoulder, moved closer to Silen's ear and whispered, "Is that a collective fart of the sea beasts in the trench?" Silen pinched Huimao's ear. "Don't talk nonsense." Huimao flicked his ear. In any case, he just felt that those bubbles were like farts. Otherwise, why would they have the color of shit? Silen looked at the bubbles that were still rising up. Although they were colored, they were definitely not the farts of the sea beasts as Huimao said. Chapter 368. As a large number of bubbles rose, some of the gases in the bubbles dissolved into the water. Silen extended his finger through the barrier and touched the seawater outside. The results of the analysis from his finger surprised Silen. There were many kinds of gases in the bubbles. Some could be used as fuel, while others were poisonous. Of course, as long as the amount did not reach a lethal level, it would not be a threat. However, these gases were all mixed together, and in such a deep sea at that. After the bubbles rose, a few sea beasts swam out. The sea beasts that lived in the trenches were generally larger. Even if they were not large, they were still difficult to deal with, such as the guardians that the millers spoke of. Silen saw the tentacle-like creatures that he had seen before, as well as a few larger sea beasts. However, these sea beasts all fled as if they were taking refuge. Those that did not escape fled to other parts of the trench. Bang! Another loud noise rang out. The entire undersea city shook along with it. The sea beasts fled even faster. The guardians that stayed with the millers gathered together and stuck close to the ground. Their eyes were filled with fear. "It's here." The elder was trembling with excitement. The legendary ruler of the trench, the true ruler of the deep sea, Antique. Celia and the others were also staring at the trench. They had only heard about the tyrant of the trench, Antique, from their elders, and their elders had only heard about it from their elders' elders. None of them had actually seen the giant beast at the top of the food chain in the oceanic paradise. The seawater began to churn. From the swaying seaweed, it could be seen that the seawater was churning on a large scale, and it was getting more and more intense. Lung stood there nervously. He could feel that big fellow approaching. Although it had no ill intentions, the pressure it gave off was too great. Woo! A low sound came from the bottom of the trench. It sounded like muffled thunder in everyone's ears, and it grew louder by the second. Some of the millers had already covered their ears and retreated in fear, huddling together with the guardians, in search of a sense of security. Sillin recorded the sound of this sea beast. He could analyze many things from the sound. Woo! There was another sound, this one much closer and louder than the previous one. Lung, who was standing on the platform, also let out a strange cry as he communicated with the sea beast. After that, the sea beast didn't roar anymore. Instead, it let out a relatively gentle sound that wouldn't make people feel like it was unbearable. The creatures that usually created death factors all avoided the deep and serene trench, making way for them. Some of the plants on the walls of the trench also shrank. When the huge head appeared, everyone couldn't help but take a deep breath. He had always thought that the trench was wide, but to this big guy, it wasn't. As the sea beast slowly swam upstream, Sillin finally got a good look at it. However, when they saw the true face of this big guy, not only Sillin, but Ingweji and the others also thought of the same thing, the sea beast on the round platform. When they first arrived, they had entered the second floor of the hill and placed the star atlas fragment into a round table. The round table then rotated and formed a pattern. It was no surprise that it was this sea beast. 1,000 years? The only 1,000-year beast Sillin had ever seen was that giant viper. However, this huge guy in front of them was probably much older than that. Was this a hint from the round table? Sea beasts that lived for this long were highly intelligent creatures even if they didn't understand human speech. They couldn't be treated carelessly. While Lung was communicating with the big guy, Sillin patiently listened to Huemao's complaints. Why does this big guy look so stupid? The sea beasts around here aren't good either. They don't even know how to speak or use their tails to stand upright. Sillin knew that Huimao was thinking about his friends in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire and his pet, Blue Skin. It was just too embarrassed to say it out loud. Blue Skin won't grow this big in the future. Its mother is only as big as some of the middle-level creatures in this trench, Sillin said. Huimao disagreed. It's useless to just grow big without a brain. Blue-skinned sea beasts are so cunning. This sea beast is smart. Smart my ass. Sillin didn't argue with it anymore. The cat was throwing a tantrum right now and wouldn't listen to anything he said. After communicating with the big guy for a while, Lung smiled at Ingweji and the others. Antique said it can help us get up there. Antique was the sea beast's name. Young master, I have a question, Pescado said. If you really can control all the sea beasts, why did you have to summon this big guy? The other sea beasts should be able to help, right? Is it because this big guy doesn't allow it? Lung shook his head. The other sea beasts can't help us. Part of the reason is because of Antique, but it's not the main reason. 1,000 years ago, the first person who drank the tear of God told them that they weren't allowed to help anyone who came to the bottom of the sea return to the surface. They could only wait for the next person who drank the tear of God and successfully developed a second voice. The sea beasts in the trench aren't stupid. Even if they can't obey this rule anymore, they'll tell their descendants what to do. Plus, with Antique around, the sea beasts in the trench and some of the larger sea beasts won't violate this rule. So that's how it is. Plus, I wanted to try out the tear of God's ability. If it can't tame the ruler of the sea, then it won't be the real tear of God. Or rather, it might not be worthy of its name. In the end, it seems like it lives up to its name. Young master, what did you talk about with that big guy for so long? Another person asked. We talked about the past, but it wasn't willing to talk too much about the Shi family. It promised those people that it wouldn't say anything. But it also said that the Shi family is its friend, and the Shi family's friend is its friend. The reason why I was able to obtain the tear of God is because of some sort of relationship. It will help us. There was no way Sillin would take Lung's last sentence seriously. If Lung hadn't mutated and created a second voice to communicate with the big guy, then the big guy probably wouldn't have a good attitude even if it had come out of hiding. Deep sea beasts didn't have good tempers. Blue Skin, for example, had two extreme tempers. It could act coquettishly to people it acknowledged, but it could only be seen as food to everyone else. Ingweji and the others were finally able to return when most mechanical technology in the deep sea couldn't be used, and the expensive triangular spaceplane was severely crippled. Moreover, it was a rewarding trip. Antique grabbed the crippled spaceplane with its claws and swam to the surface. Ingweji and the others stayed inside the spaceplane while Lung stood on Antique's head. He leaned against one of the giant horns on Antique's head and followed the creature upwards. Silan, Huimao, and Cheto were with the Mere people. This was the first time the Mere people had swum upstream as a group. With Antique clearing the way and the guardians protecting them, all they had to do now was swim upstream. This was the first time the Mere people had swum upstream without any worries in the last 1,000 years. Syria and the others felt that they were the luckiest generation of the Mere race. Not only did they see the ruler of the trench, they were also able to let go of the responsibility they had carried for 1,000 years. Every Mere person was cheering. Silan had also obtained what he wanted. The ores and materials he needed were plentiful at the bottom of Sea Paradise. The deep sea was rich in all kinds of ores, and even some of the rare ores in the League of Stars were very common here. The Mere people would often ask the guardians to help them transport some stones to the city. They wanted to forge something. Moreover, the Mere people really did treat these ores like normal stones. When Silan said he wanted to buy them, the old patriarch waved his hand and said, "Take them." However, he didn't want Silan's money no matter what. Even though Silan said that these ores were worth a lot in the League of Stars, the old patriarch didn't agree. In the end, Silan left them some trinkets and dry rations, including a few bags of fish biscuits. It was rare that Huimao didn't throw a tantrum. It was very smart. The value of those ores far exceeded the few bags of fish biscuits that were given away. After swimming past the middle layer of the ocean, Silan finally understood the use of those stairs under the coral reef. Antique stepped on those stairs and walked up step by step. However, perhaps because Antique had grown taller in the last 1,000 years, a part of his huge feet was still exposed on the stairs. Then, Antique seemed to be impatient. With every step he took, he would forcefully grind and widen the stairs. In the upper layer of the ocean, many sea beasts and small fish ran away after sensing the commotion, including the sea beasts on the atoll. In an instant, the atoll that was originally filled with sea beasts was cleared. On the surface of the ocean, huge waves rose up like a tsunami. Then, a huge beast's head appeared and rose up step by step. Antique didn't continue moving forward after approaching the atoll. That place couldn't support him, and he would only destroy the atoll if he went over. He pushed the aircraft that Ingweji and the others were on to the surface of the ocean. He used a lot of strength, and the aircraft just happened to stop at a place suitable for landing. After Huimao jumped onto the atoll, he ran to the area that he had circled around. When he found out that there were still a few sea beasts that didn't know what was good for them that had invaded his territory, Huimao bared his fangs and brandished his claws, wanting to teach them a lesson. In the end, he was grabbed by Silan and thrown into the aircraft. This triangular aircraft was in a half-scrapped state, and there were robots in charge of repairs on the main aircraft that was parked in the air. After the triangular aircraft was parked, Lung let the robots come down to repair it. However, because of the planet itself, their repair speed wasn't fast. It took almost a day for the triangular aircraft to show some improvement. This improvement was more than enough. Lung was fine as long as he could fly into the main aircraft. After all, he had no use for the triangular aircraft after leaving the planet. While the spaceplane was being repaired, Huimao seized the opportunity to fish out the guardian heart crystals. Later on, he asked Korea and the others to help him. Korea and the other youngsters were happy to leave the sea for the first time. They gifted the crystals to Huimao as a gift. As for themselves, they lived in Sea Paradise to begin with. How could they lack crystals like this? They could just find a coral reef if they wanted to. Did you bring the seeds? Scylla asked Cheto. Yes, I did. Scylla asked Cheto to collect some of the plant seeds from the coral reefs and the sea. He kept them for Scylla because the plants here were very special. He could learn a lot of information from them. Cheto had also recorded everything he experienced during this trip. When the time came, he would select a portion and send it to Aayu. This was what Aayu had requested from Scylla. Aayu didn't care who got the tier of gods in the end. He only wanted to know about the Shi family. For example, that underwater city. Antique seemed to be very reluctant to see Lung leave. Right now, he was communicating with Lung. There was no way the Andryra family would let go of this place after Lung obtained the tier of gods and learned about the underwater city. Although they wouldn't bring any trouble to this place, they would definitely send more people here in the future. However, Lung had to be the one to take the lead. After all, the sea beasts here, such as the guardians, wouldn't be polite to anyone. Before leaving, Antique swam to where Scylla and Huimao were. Under Lung's translation, he communicated with Scylla and Huimao. Antique was very curious about the snakeskin coat Scylla was wearing. It was because he could sense an ancient and powerful aura just like himself. Although they weren't of the same species or sea beasts, it was still very difficult to find a beast like this. As for Huimao, Antique only said, "Come and play more in the future when you have time. I have a lot of ores there." This one sentence caused Antique's status in Huimao's heart to soar. Huimao, who had been wearing a fierce expression, was now grinning from ear to ear. His smug look made Scylla want to slap him. Weeze's good impression of Antique had increased once again, and it made Scylla take out a scale and give it to Antique. To Antique, that scale was really too small. However, this small scale contained a lot of power. At least, it was an absolute deterrent to many beasts. Antique was very happy to receive this small gift, and chatted with Huimao for a long time. Pescado, who was not far away, poked Ingweji, who had a serious expression on his face. Why do I feel that the big sea beast's attitude towards Fat Cat is better than Master's? Ingweji thought about it, and said, after all, they're both beasts, and not ordinary ones at that. Of course they're different. This wasn't a good reason, but they couldn't think of a reason. Although they had thought about it before, they didn't dare admit it. That Fat Cat couldn't be as powerful as Antique, could it? When they had first arrived, it was only their group and their lonely aircraft. However, when they left, there were mill tribesmen on the surface of the ocean and on the atoll. Many guardian sea beasts created splashes, and there was even a huge sea beast that watched them ascend into the sky. On this trip, Lung had obtained the tier of gods. When he returned, he would become a figure in the Andryra family that wouldn't lose to his grandfather, Andryra Phocos. In fact, his authority might even be greater than Phocos. Scylla, on the other hand, had obtained what he wanted. These ores and materials were enough for the 11th squad to develop further. He had already experienced this land of evil, so he had no regrets. Perhaps in the near future, he would return to this planet and visit that city under the deep blue ocean. Sitting in the seat of the aircraft, Scylla thought as he turned a crystal in his hand. The crystal looked very ordinary, and it wasn't cut very well. It wasn't as eye-catching as those exquisitely processed gems. However, this crystal was far harder than it looked. Although it wasn't precisely cut, it was as enchanting as a flower when a ray of light shone on it. "What is this?" Pescado asked. "A souvenir," Scylla replied while turning the crystal in his hand. Pescado wasn't interested in the crystal at all. After a yawn, he returned to the lounge to sleep just like his companions. Andryra's people, including Lung, were already resting in the lounge. This trip had taken too much effort, and Lung hadn't fully mastered the second voice yet. Communicating with Antique for such a long time was exhausting enough for him. The aircraft was on autopilot, So Sillin tossed the crystal in his hand and asked the reading Cheto, "How do you think the Shi family managed to seal those giant sea beasts?" The sea beasts sealed inside the crystal were so lively and natural that many of them looked exactly the same as before they were sealed. One could only say that the sealing process was too sudden, too short, and too unexpected. Cheto closed his book and said, "I'm not sure. Those crystals are very uniform, very hard, and more than 90% of them are made up of water molecules." The crystal in Sillin's hand was one of the sealed sea beast specimens. It took a lot of effort to cut it out, and after multiple analyses, Sillin couldn't help but be puzzled by its composition. What kind of technology did the Shi family use back then? It was unimaginable. The gray cat lying on Sillin's lap didn't look like it was sleeping at all. It was sleeping thoughtlessly, and no one knew what it was dreaming about. It even chuckled twice. The spaceplane didn't fly straight back to the Andryara family's encampment. Instead, it landed on a planet and separated from Sillin's group. "Why are we taking a passenger starship again, Sillin?" Hui Mao complained. "A passenger starship is inconspicuous." There was nothing Sillin could do about it. According to the news Sillin received, all private spaceplanes had been strictly inspected as of late. Only a handful of people in Sector H knew about this, and no one else knew about it. For now, Sillin didn't know the specific reason. He would contact Sillin when he learned about it. As for now, Sillin waved the only ticket in his hand and said, "Just make do with it." Sillin only bought one ticket. Hui Mao and Cheto didn't need tickets. When Sillin boarded the passenger starship leaving Sector, Hui Mao and Cheto had already boarded the starship without anyone noticing. After the starship took off, Sillin pulled down his sleep pod and fell asleep. He was a little dizzy from thinking too much. After a couple of space jumps, the passenger starship entered normal flight mode when it passed through a magnetic field. Somewhere inside the starship, Hui Mao was crouching on top of the starship's shell and looking at the stars. "Cheto, do you think we'll run into space robbers?" Hui Mao asked Cheto next to him with an expectant look. Cheto was lying down with his arms pillowed on top of his head. After hearing Hui Mao's question, he answered, "According to the data we've collected so far, there's a 99% chance that we won't run into them. The League of Stars may be chaotic right now, but there are very few robbers in this area." Cheto had just finished speaking when an explosion came from one of the starship's passenger cabins. Hui Mao flicked his ears and wagged his tail. "I think the 1% has appeared." Chapter 369. It wasn't that Cheto was wrong. It was true that there were very few robberies in this area, and even a hunter would have to behave themselves. After all, the influence of the few big families in Sector H was too great, and everyone had to give them some face. No robber would be stupid enough to come to this place and rob. However, what happened right now was truly out of everyone's expectations. No one would have thought that something like this would happen in this place. The moment Hui Mao noticed the commotion in the passenger cabin, he immediately went over to watch the show. Cheto didn't want to stay here any longer. Although the passenger cabin where the accident happened wasn't the one Sillin was in, the two cabins were very close to each other. There was no telling what might happen. Sillin had been sleeping very well at first, and he even deduced a couple of formulas in his sleep. But he was woken up by a series of explosions. The passengers around him were very panicked, and they only calmed down a little after the flight attendants came over to calm them down. It was because everyone believed that no serious accident could happen in this area, and even if something did happen, someone would come over very quickly to deal with it. However, to their disappointment, the cabin door they were in was blown open with a bang the moment the group of people in the cabin sat down. Two brawny men with guns and shoulder cannons stood outside the door. It was their shoulder cannons that blew open the cabin door just now. The cabin door was controlled by a password, but the captain didn't tell them the password. After their jammer came into effect, the door was shut even tighter. The only way to save time was to blow it open. The appearance of the two people at the door caused the passengers who had just calmed down to panic once more. It was only after the two brawny men fired a couple of shots to silence the passengers that the cabin finally quieted down. Normally, people who rode passenger starships didn't have powerful backgrounds, and they weren't rich people either. If that was the case, who would ride passenger starships in the first place? They would have flown away in their personal spaceplanes a long time ago. However, although the people here weren't exactly rich, they were still relatively rich compared to the normal people of the other sectors. Most of the people who came to Sector H were here to make a fortune. Sector H was one of the sectors ranked at the top of the 10 free trade sectors in terms of overall evaluation. Robbers? This was the common reaction of the people in the cabin when they saw the duo. The flight attendant and the mechanical assistants did not move at all. They did not know what to do because the guards on the starship did not appear. They had not appeared yet. In other words, if they were to continue like this, they wouldn't be able to count on those guards. What about the defense system? It was also malfunctioning, as if the signal had been interfered with. Now, the control room on the starship had been completely replaced. The original pilots had been beaten unconscious and thrown to the side and tied up. No captain spoke, and no guards appeared on the starship. The passengers knew that there was no point in looking forward to it. Saving their lives was more important. They just hoped that these robbers would let them go. However, to everyone's surprise, one of the robbers went straight to a seat and then pulled the person on the seat away without looking at anyone else. "Hey, what are you doing? I don't have much money on me. Don't hit me, I'll give you whatever you want, okay? Don't kill me." The person who was being pulled like a little chick said shakily. However, the strong man who was pulling him ignored him completely and walked away, leaving the group of passengers staring at each other. However, there were still two strong men standing guard at the door, so they did not dare to move carelessly. Even people who thought they had good mobility would not dare to act carelessly. Didn't they see that the robbers were fully armed? 2 fists are no match for a cannon barrel. There was an uncle sitting next to Silen. The uncle looked at the 2 people at the door with trepidation and was about to share his feelings with the people next to him when he realized that there was no one beside him since some time ago. Celine had already hidden himself when the cabin door was blasted open. The seat he had bought was close to the corner, so he didn't have much of a presence. Just now, while everyone's attention was attracted by the explosion, he had already made his move. These people did not look like robbers, but more like violent people. There was not much greed in their eyes, but more disregard for life. In their eyes, these passengers were not even comparable to insects. They were organized and planned violent people. They were definitely not after money. The person who was taken away just now was a doctor. Silen was sure that he was just an ordinary doctor with no special background. Even such a doctor was forcibly taken away. Could it be that these people's target was the doctor on the starship? The fact that they were able to go directly to that seat after coming in showed that these people were very familiar with the information of the passengers on this passenger starship. Silen used fake information, so he was not afraid that they would find out anything. The person who was being pulled was directly taken to a lounge, which belonged to the main people in charge of this starship. The others would not have such good treatment. There was a person lying on the bed in the lounge, a woman who was almost middle-aged. Because of her injuries, she looked very weak. Her complexion was very bad, and her skin was a little dry and cracked. Even if the person sitting next to her kept using the humidifier to relieve her, it did not help. No matter how beautiful a person was, after being tortured to this state by illness, she would not be much better, at least on the surface. There were 2 people sitting next to the patient on the bed. One was the person who kept using the humidifier, and the other was fiddling with some medicine. He should also be a doctor. However, looking at the way they interacted and how casual they were with each other, they should be in cahoots. "Boss, here he is." The strong man who walked in put down the poor doctor in his hands and pushed him forward. The doctor was originally frightened, and his legs were weak. He was still fine after being pulled all the way here, but now that he was put down and saw the people in the room, he felt his legs go even weaker, and he directly knelt on the ground. The person sitting next to the bed holding the humidifier with his back facing the door finally turned his head slowly. He was also a very strong and burly man, with thick brown hair covering his head. Just one side of his face, and he did not even look directly at the eyes, but it made the poor doctor feel as if he had been cut by a knife. His aura was too strong, and it was oppressive and tyrannical. It was like a steel knife with a threatening murderous aura, making people who saw him tremble in fear, afraid that they would not be able to avoid him in time. "Come here," the man said. It was just 2 words, but it made people feel unusually depressed. The doctor who was kneeling on the ground trembled and felt that he could not breathe. He moved forward a little timidly, and then directly went limp. The eyebrows of the person who pulled him over trembled. He did not expect that the doctor would be so useless, and he had already fainted before he could be used. "Boss, should we get rid of this?" The person at the door did not dare to look at his boss. He was afraid to look directly into his boss's eyes. "Throw him out." The person sitting on the bed looked at the patient and said without turning his head. These 3 words were light, but it made the big man guarding the door clearly feel that his boss was now even angrier, but because of the person on the bed, he had been suppressing his anger. Don't be fooled by his gentleness to the patient on the bed. If it was someone else, he would definitely not have such an attitude. "Yes. We are looking for other doctors on the passenger list, and I believe that someone will be sent here soon." The voice of the big man at the door was getting smaller and smaller. He originally wanted to comfort his boss, but now the more he spoke, the less confidence he had. He wanted to slap himself a few times. Seeing that his boss did not speak, the big man carefully raised his head and looked over. His boss still had his back facing the door, and he was gently nursing the patient with the humidifier. However, after the person who was dispensing the medicine on the other side gave him a look, the big man hurriedly picked up the person who fainted on the floor and took him out of the room. The person holding the bottle looked at the patient on the bed, then looked at the other one, sighed softly, and continued to fiddle with the medicine in his hand. Although they had long been used to seeing life and death, and were also prepared to meet God or go to hell in the next moment, when it really came to this moment, they were reluctant, especially when the person who was about to leave was their dear friend. The feeling of helplessness was even stronger. No one could escape death, and no one was willing to bear that kind of helplessness and despair. The person sitting next to the bed carefully moved the humidifier, so that it could work better. Suddenly, his arm that was moving the humidifier paused, and the next moment, his other hand was already holding a gun, pointing at a certain part of the room, and fired 3 consecutive shots. The penetrating power of the bullet was very strong, and it went through the wall of the room and shot to the other side of the wall. The wall that was left with bullet marks cracked outwards from the bullet holes, turning into debris and falling down. The originally small bullet hole became the size of a fist in less than a breath's time. He raised his hand, raised the gun, and shot, and this series of actions was also completed in an extremely short period of time. The person holding the bottle on the other side of the bed also stopped what he was doing, took out his gun, and looked at the bullet hole vigilantly. There was someone on the other side of the wall, and it was not one of their people. Before entering this room, they had cleaned up the surrounding restrooms, and there were people guarding the outside, so how could someone enter the room next to it? Their own people would definitely not do it, and they knew their boss's temper, so it could only be someone else. Through the 3 fist-sized holes, the 2 people on this side saw the unknown person on the other side. They did not know him, but this would not lower their vigilance. Under the gaze of the 2 people on this side, a finger poked into one of the holes, and then cut to the side, like a knife cutting bread. It looked very easy, and soon, a door-shaped passage was cut. The person holding the humidifier narrowed his eyes. He was sure that he had hit the person on the other side of the wall just now, or there would have been another sound of the wall being pierced. But who was this person? Cheto passed through the wall and walked over, but he did not approach. If he approached recklessly, the other party would become even more hostile towards him, and this was not Cheto's intention. Seeing that the other party did not move or move closer, the person sitting on the bed asked, "Are you from the 6th Corps? Or the 5th Corps, the 8th Corps, or even the 2nd Corps?" The person put down the humidifier in his hand and looked at the person walking over from the other side of the wall. This was the first time he put down the humidifier in his hand since entering this room. None of them. This voice did not belong to Cheto. Behind Cheto, Silen walked over from the other side of the wall. "Blood-Eye Aiken?" Silen looked at the person sitting on the bed. After Silen exited the passenger cabin, he snuck into the room next door through the air vent at the top of the passageway. It was also there that Silen received lung-specific information. The reason Sector H was under martial law right now was because there were reports that a dangerous person had entered this sector and stolen a luxurious spaceplane. Aiken thus, one of the major forces that had recently risen up in Sector V, the leader of the Freedom Army. Because Aikenthus's eyes were as red as blood, he was also called Blood-Eye Aiken by the people. However, no one knew why Aiken thus would come here. He was a dangerous person. He was bad-tempered, tyrannical, and very strong. It was obvious from the fact that he was able to detect the movements in the other room through the wall just now that his senses were very strong, and his actions of firing the gun were extremely fast. Just now, Cheto was just trying to touch the wall to install a surveillance device. He did not expect to be shot 3 times the moment he touched the wall. Silen looked at Aiken thus. Right now, Aikenthus's eyes were no longer blood red. Many people recognized Aiken thus from his signature blood-red eyes, but that was not the case right now. Right now, Aikenthus's eyes were a little off. Even their movements were a little stiff, and they did not have much luster. This was because Aiken thus had used drugs. He knew that his signature blood-red eyes would be easily recognized by others, but his eyes were too special. A lot of drugs were useless against him, and he could not wear contact lenses or dye them conventionally. In the end, it was Enlacen, the person who had been concocting the drugs next to him, who finally came up with the drug after a period of research. However, the side effect was that after using the drug, one's eyesight would decrease, and their eyes would not be able to keep up with the body's movements. Even so, Aikenthus's senses were undeniable. The drug controlled the color of his eyes. When Silen first saw them, they were brown, a brown that did not have much luster. However, after Silen said Aikenthus's name, his eyes began to change. It was as if they were dyed with blood, and the brown color spread from the edges until it covered his entire pupil. Some people described Blood-Eye Aiken's eyes as hell, and they were not lying. At the very least, Silen felt like it. When the color of blood covered Aikenthus's pupils, everything around him seemed to have fallen into a space filled with blood. In reality, this was just an illusion caused by the psychological pressure of a gaze, but there were not many people who could resist this kind of pressure. When people looked at Blood-Eye Aiken, they felt that everything around them had been dyed red. Hearing Silen reveal his true identity, Aiken thus did not continue to disguise himself. Moreover, the drug would restrict the movement of his eyes. The enemy was clearly very strong, and Aiken did not expect the people outside to be of much help. Therefore, he decisively removed the drug's control. This way, he would be able to deal with what was coming next better. The blood eyes that had returned to their original color showed that the owner of this body was extremely hostile towards the newcomers. It was as if he wanted to come and kill them immediately. "We are just passers-by. We are not from the military, and we have no intention of tangling with you," Silen said. Aiken thus did not trust Silen. In fact, the number of people Aiken thus could trust could be counted on one hand, and considering the environment of Sector V, it was already good enough that people like them could be trusted. At first, Silen did not plan to get involved. After all, he was also on this starship, and all he needed to do was pay attention to the enemy's movements. He would not participate in anything else. However, he did not expect that Cheto would be discovered. Since he was discovered, he could not go according to plan. According to the information Lung provided, Aiken thus would not let Silen and Cheto go easily. Scylla was not afraid of fighting Akanthus head-on, but he did not want to expose too much at a time like this. Akanthus was operating in secret, and he himself had to conceal his tracks. Akanthus was not planning to let Scylla and Cheto go. He was not afraid even if the enemy had shown him his uniqueness just now. Just as Akanthus was about to attack, Selene spoke up. Selene's words caused Akanthus, who was about to attack, to stop in his tracks. She can't hold on for much longer. 15 minutes at most. You know what will happen after 15 minutes. The person on the bed was very weak. From the rhythm of her breathing and the weak sound she made, Scylla could tell that she was one step closer to death with every passing moment. She's been poisoned. Plus, her body may be weak to begin with. It's one disaster after another, Scylla continued. If Scylla's first sentence was to stop Akanthus, then Scylla's second sentence temporarily cut off Akanthus's thoughts. Right now, he had no effective way to slow down the bedridden patient's condition. However, Scylla's words allowed Akanthus to see a ray of hope. He was willing to try even if it was just a tiny bit. They did not go to Sector E because the military was keeping a close eye on that place. Sector H was undoubtedly the best choice other than Sector E. Sector H was a very prosperous sector because of the existence of great families like the Andryra family and many famous families with long histories in the League of Stars. They supported the prosperity of Sector H. Sector H had a lot of things, and its development was not limited to just one area. From food, clothing, housing, healthcare, literature and education, all of them were well developed. They came to Sector H for treatment, but they did not expect some mistakes to occur along the way and be discovered. The water vapor in the bedridden patient's body was seriously evaporating, and she could not even eat normal food. What was even stranger was that liquid food would accelerate the rate of her body's exhaustion, and she could not be injected with nutrients through the infusion tube. She could not easily swallow dry rations either, so she could only rely on small specially made nutrition pills to support herself. While speaking, the fingers of the person on the bed moved. Her eyes moved on the dry, dead skin and flakes on her face, but they did not open. Akan saw it. The person on the bed said. Her voice was very hoarse, and there were a few words that she could not utter. After saying this, she fell into a deep slumber again. 10 minutes left. Scylla looked at Akanthus. You can save her. As long as you save her, I will agree to anything you want, as long as I can do it, even if it means going against the 8 great legions. Looking into Akanthus's bloodshot eyes, Scylla shook his head. I cannot save her, but I can delay them. Chapter 370. How long? Akanthus asked hurriedly. Right now they were racing against time. There was a way to truly cure the illness, but the person on the bed could not afford to drag it out. They had already used up too much time, and the patient on the bed was almost at his limit. Give me 10 more hours, no, 5 more hours. The starter medicine can be made after 5 hours. Inranen said at the side. As a doctor, Inranen had always thought that his medical skills were pretty good, but this incident had dealt a huge blow to him. If he could not win against Azrael's scythe, then he was a failure. Inri, the patient on the bed and Akanthus had grown up together since they were young. In an environment like Sector V, it was truly rare for them to have a friendship like this. Friendship that was like scrap metal in the eyes of many people in Sector V was like a precious treasure to him. He did not care how many people died in Sector V. Even if everyone in Sector V died, as long as the 3 of them were fine. He had come to Sector H to find the people he wanted to find, and Inranen had also found a way to cure the illness. But no matter how he calculated, no matter how fast he sped up, he could not keep up with the speed at which the illness was worsening. Due to the rapid deterioration of the person on the bed, Akanthus did not hesitate to expose himself here, hijack the starship, and capture the starship's doctor. But none of them could prolong the illness. Inranen was about to give up at first, but Scylla's words undoubtedly rekindled his confidence. I don't know how long I can prolong the illness. We'll only know after we try. Sillin answered. As he spoke, Sillin walked towards the bed. When Sillin had just moved his feet, he had already felt Achenthus' strong hostility and murderous intent. This was not to say that Achenthus had a strong hostility towards Sillin, but Achenthus's conditioned reflex. However, Sillin stopped after taking 2 steps forward. If he walked too close, the other 2 would not be at ease, and Sillin himself would not be at ease either. Blood-Eye Achenthus was not a good-tempered person, and if he got too close, Sillin could not guarantee what would happen. He could not be sure if the other would kill him. After all, they were not familiar with each other, and no one knew each other's background. Sillin's information was limited. After Sillin stopped, he took out a green pearl and handed it over. Try this. It was true that the patient on the bed was poisoned, but the poison was very strange. It was alive. They were like a fire that quickly evaporated the water in the patient's body. However, they did not allow the patient to consume liquid food that contained a lot of water. They did not allow the patient to drink water either. If they did, they would make more noise, and the water would evaporate faster. The poison had seeped into every part of the patient's body, so injections were not allowed. They were like a group of monsters that hated water. They could not be seen, but they existed everywhere in the patient's body. Since the medicine didn't work, neither did the potions that contained a lot of water. Sillin thinks about it and finally chose the green pearls. The affinity of nature and the gift of life force would allow the patient lying on the bed to hold on for a longer period of time. How long she can last will depend on herself. Sillin wasn't sure. He didn't know the patient well. For different people, their desire to survive in desperate situations was also different. No one could determine the limit of a person's body's function. Achan thus took the green pearl from Sillin's hand. They had never seen such a pearl before, but the feeling after holding it in his hand ignited Acanthus's confidence. The life force transmitted from such a little green pearl made Achan thus have the urge to cry. How do I use it? Achan thus asked Sillin. Before this, he was still skeptical, but if the other party could take out such a precious item, he was definitely not from the military. Put it in her mouth. She won't be able to swallow it, but this green pearl can play a better role, Sillin said. Achan thus did as he was told. After he put the pearl into the patient's mouth, the patient's originally weak and almost non-existent breathing quickly grew a little stronger, and it continued to improve. Although the rate of improvement wasn't fast, it was the first good thing that had happened in so many days. The green pearl Sillin gave out wasn't one of the 5 largest pearls he had, but one of the smaller ones. Speaking of which, some of these green pearls were Huemao's property. Right now, the bastard was probably grinding his claws in a corner to vent his anger. After this, Sillin would have to buy cat food to appease him. Although the patient on the bed had walked a circle around the line of death, her desire to live was still very strong. Inrelson passed a bottle of supplementary medicine to Achan thus. It was a spray medicine that would provide some relief when sprayed on the surface of the patient's body. Using it alone wouldn't have any effect, but when combined with this green pearl, it would at least improve the situation a little. When Achan thus was spraying the medicine on the patient on the bed, he suddenly stopped and looked at Sillin and Cheto. The look in his eyes was very clear: stay away. Sillin didn't say anything. He turned around and walked next door. They would continue their conversation later. Cheto followed Sillin back to the room next door. He even closed the wall board he had cut off on the way back. It was as if he was closing a door. After Sillin returned to the room next door, Wheeze jumped out of nowhere and scratched Sillin's trousers with its claws in dissatisfaction, producing a few strands of noodles. You should have just killed those bastards. You deal with one, Cheto deal with the other, and leave the small fries outside to me. The 3 of us can definitely take them out. But how can you give that treasure away? Even if you still have a dozen or so pearls in your hands, every one of them can be sold for a high price. I asked Lung, and he said that the value of the pearl will increase. Huimao continued to scratch. The surroundings had been set to silent, so Sillin wasn't afraid that the people in the room next door would hear them. Sillin twisted the back of Huimao's neck hair and brought it in front of him. I didn't say that I would give it to them for free. Huimao, who was baring his fangs and brandishing his claws a moment ago, suddenly felt his fur become tame again. Cheto, did you see the tattoo on the back of the patient on the bed just now? Sillin asked. I only saw a little. Cheto projected the scene just now. When Aiken thus was spraying the medicine on the patient, a little pattern on the patient's shoulder was revealed. Is that a feather? Huimao said. Only a little bit of the tattoo was revealed. It looked like the tip of a feather. After that, Aiken thus chased Sillin and Cheto out of the room. Is there something wrong with that tattoo? Huimao curled his tail and suddenly smiled strangely. Don't tell me you guys want to see that woman naked. Sillin gave him a slap and said, is your brain filled with fish poop? Then why are you paying attention to this? Huimao flicked his ears. Sillin took out a document. It was a document Lung had sent him, and there was a picture in it. There were 3 people in the picture, and they were the 3 current leaders of a great force in Sector V called the Freedom Army. The one in the center was Blood-Eye Aiken, the one on Aiken's right was In Renault, and the one on his left was a masked man wearing a cloak. He was one of the 3 leaders of the Freedom Army, Blue. Blue was very mysterious, and not even the Andryra family had any concrete information about him. The Freedom Army's emblem is a blue bird. I heard that Blue was the one who drew it himself, and it was later confirmed as the Freedom Army's new emblem. Sillin read out a paragraph from the information and said, that patient can't be a small fry if he's able to gain Aiken thus and In Renault's attention. It's also possible that 2 of the 3 leaders have come out and left one behind to guard the base. However, if the patient has a feather tattoo of a kiss on his back. This made Sillin even more suspicious that Blue was the patient lying on the bed. They were truly relieved that all 3 leaders had come out. However, the people of Sector V probably didn't hold much weight in their hearts. 10 minutes later, 2 thumps came from the wall. Cheto deactivated the mute shield and moved the board away again. Let's talk terms, Aiken thus said. Right now, Aikenthus's anxiety had calmed down a lot. It would seem that the patient was in good condition. Whiz hit itself again the moment Cheto removed the wall planks. It was ready to counterattack the moment Cheto made a move. In fact, Whiz was hoping that Cheto would cause some trouble so that it would have a justifiable reason to take back the item and rob it again. However, to Huimao's disappointment, the other party didn't have that intention. Aiken thus didn't want Sillin to leak the information on their side, and Sillin also asked the other party to keep the matter between him and Cheto a secret. Sillin tossed another pill to Aiken thus. This is a nutrient pill. It's much better than the ones you have. It doesn't stimulate the patient too much, and it lasts longer. Aiken thus didn't say anything and accepted it. Hiding in a corner, Huimao continued to scratch his claws. That was a nutrient pill gifted by the food god. That wastrel Sillin had given away something valuable again. Name your price, Aiken thus said. I don't need the money. Sector V doesn't have many minerals I need anyway. I don't like owing favors. It can't be helped. I haven't decided yet, so you can owe me for now. Aikenthus's bloody eyes stared at Sillin and Cheto for a moment. Then, he nodded and said, all right, I'll owe you for now. Right now, the Freedom Army wasn't rich, they didn't have many minerals, and they weren't even equipped with advanced weapons. All they had was a bunch of people who weren't afraid of death. After they came to an agreement, Sillin asked Aiken thus, where did the news of Osculos's death come from? Back then, Star Rank Hunter Osculos's death had come from the mouth of a violent organization leader at Sector V. However, no one knew who had told him. After that, Sector V fell into chaos, and a new group of rising forces developed extremely quickly. It wasn't long before the people of Sector V began to brazenly unleash their firepower and announced the establishment of the Freedom Alliance. Aikenthus's Freedom Army was an important member of the Freedom Alliance. Sillin hoped to learn some information from Aiken thus, but Aiken thus himself didn't know. All I know is that a couple of famous leaders leaked news of Osculos's death at the time, and the forces that relied on Osculos began to fight amongst themselves. It was at that time that a lot of new forces began to develop, including us. Aiken thus expressed that he couldn't answer Silen's question. Also, those big shots are all dead. Some died by accident, some were killed by their subordinates or other forces. In short, the big shots who leaked the news are as dead as can be. The first thing Silen thought of was silencing. How could the big shots who had lived in Sector V for so many years be slaughtered so easily, and not just one of them at that? Although Aiken thus knew that something was amiss, the big shots were just unlucky. They seized this opportunity to rise to power, and if they didn't rise, they would have been suppressed, and they would have become cannon fodder. This starship will land on an inconspicuous planet, Gao Peng said. Aiken thus said. This was to tell Silen that he could leave at that time. However, if you run into some Sector H escorts along the way, then it's hard to say. That won't happen, Silen answered confidently, you won't run into them. Don't worry and go. However, the premise is the safety of the passengers on the starship. Aiken thus was very curious about Silen's identity. The fact that he could say this with such certainty meant that he was connected to at least one of the big families in Sector H. Even so, his relationship wasn't shallow. Even so, he still had to hide his identity. Who on earth was he? Aiken thus fulfilled his promise and ordered his subordinates to stop attacking the passengers. Of course, the disobedient passengers couldn't blame them. The passenger starship landed on an inconspicuous little planet. Normally, passenger starships wouldn't enter a planet. The arrival of this starship caused a lot of people on the planet to panic. After the starship stopped, the passengers inside the starship also swarmed out to escape. Aiken thus and his men took advantage of the chaos to disappear. Silen did the same. There was already a spaceplane parked on the other side of the planet. It wasn't big, and it didn't look too eye-catching. After Silen walked closer, the spaceplane's hatch opened and revealed a metal head. Long time no see. You're finally back. The blue bars on Moon's face narrowed. Lying on Cheto's shoulder, Hui Mao looked listless. After responding to Moon listlessly, he buried his head inside again. Moon looked at Silen. This fat cat usually lay on Silen's shoulder. Why was he lying on Cheto's shoulder and pointing his butt at Silen? Throwing a tantrum again? Sigh, why did he say, again? However, since Moon knew Hui Mao better than Hui Mao, he wasn't worried that Hui Mao would keep throwing a tantrum. Wheeze, I brought you something. Moon took out a bag of fish biscuits, it's a new variety. The taste has improved. The listless Hui Mao's ears perked up and his spirits rose. You've released a new flavor so soon. Shouldn't we wait for a while longer to hit the market? The gray cat nimbly bit open the packaging and started eating. This isn't on the market yet, Moon replied. Silen looked puzzled, did Food King look for you? When we went to a trading center close to Sector S, Food King came looking for us. He recognized your double immediately, but he didn't expose you. He even put on an act. Did he say anything? He told you to contact him after you returned. He said it wasn't urgent, and it wasn't about the people at Sector S. Moon boarded the spaceplane and left the planet. As for the passengers on the planet, someone would come and take care of them very soon. While Moon was piloting the spaceplane and listening to Hui Mao talk about Sea Paradise, Silen was thinking about what Food King Hara wanted. If it was about Genya, he shouldn't have come looking for him right now. The passage wasn't guaranteed yet, and Silen had no intention of returning to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire right now. The 11th Squad had completed their mission and was staying at the base. When Silen returned, they were training. They were planning to continue their mission, but Silen told them to return to the base first. Mo Hung was very happy that Silen was able to return safely. Of course, he was happy because Silen had returned safely. Secondly, he was happy because Silen had brought back a batch of rare ores. These ores could be used to refine several kinds of alloys suitable for space fighters, and they were all high-quality materials. He ordered the robots to drag the ores away while he went into the workshop to study the ores. Sillin returned to his room and contacted Food King. "Long time no see, kid." Food King was still the same old Food King. The fat on his face was almost piled up. "Did you get fatter again?" Sillin teased. Food King touched the fat on his face and sighed. "Just something bothersome." Food King liked to eat whenever he was in a bad mood, but he also liked to express it when he was happy. "What bothersome?" "Your companies are doing pretty well right now. The League of Stars might be a mess, but your business hasn't." "It's not business, Sillin. This is why I called you. You know the Robert family, right?" "The Robert family? The family that owns the Robot Kingdom?" "That's them. I received some news not long ago that they're probably going to attack some of the hunters. I don't think the 4 great hunters will encounter such a situation, since the Robert family has no reason to offend them. Still, it's always good to be on guard." "Amen, I understand. Thank you for the reminder." "It's nothing. I'm just feeling a bit annoyed. That's one of the reasons I'm reminding you to be prepared, because it concerns you hunters." "What else?" "There's no need to tell you the details. It's my own problem." "Sigh, work hard." "Oh right, Sillin, I'm planning to expand the trade zone. What do you think about building a trade zone in Sector V?" If it was anyone else, there was no way they would want to build a trade zone in Sector V, especially one related to food. That being said, Sector V was a big pancake, a pancake coated with chili peppers. It all depended on one's appetite. "You want to go?" "I have an idea. I've done some research, but I haven't decided on a partner yet. Do you have any suggestions? I want to know what you hunters think about the other side." Sillin thinks for a moment. "Let me recommend someone to you." "Who?" "Blood-Eye Aiken of the Free Army." After the call with Food King, Sillin went to find Shikai, who was busy at the workshop. "Robot Kingdom?" Shikai frowned. How dare he use this title? Chapter 371. Sillin told Shikai about the Robert family, and as expected, Shikai disdained the Robert family's Robot Kingdom very much. He even went to Yudi and asked for some information about the Robert family, including the robots and semi-biological weapons they produced. Where did they get the courage to give themselves such a title? Shikai asked while staring at a robot on the screen. The screen in front of Shikai was displaying a robot that looked similar to a human. It looked similar to the 4th and 5th generation robots Sillin and the others had seen before. Many people didn't know much about robots, but they couldn't deny that the Robert family's robots were amazing. They were just like real people. They could throw tantrums, comfort people like friends, and turn into well-trained soldiers to carry out their master's orders. Of course, that was only true for laymen. Shikai had studied the origin robots for many years. The Shi family of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire had researched the origin robots generation after generation. They knew all too well which ones were artificial implants, and which ones were special types like Moon and the others. A single glance was all it took for Shikai to see the difference. Forget identifying them with his own eyes, Shikai could tell which were humans and which were robots just by looking at the image on the light screen. If it was Cheto, Shikai might not necessarily be able to identify him. That was the difference. In Shikai's own words, these inferior goods couldn't interfere with his judgment. However, Sillin didn't have much information on him, and Yudi and the others hadn't collected much useful information. That was why Sillin asked Huajing and Lung to look into the Robert family's recent movements. They had heard of the Robert family's recent movements, but they didn't know much about them. Although they didn't give Sillin much information, Lung and Huajing did give Sillin some information about the Robert family in the past 2 years. The large-scale robot mutiny at Robert Frenz's place had dealt a huge blow to the Robert family. Back then, Robert Friends had given Sillin the impression that he was a stubborn and obsessive man who forced himself to believe a lie even though he knew it was all a lie. The Robert family had the right to be arrogant in the League of Stars, but too much arrogance and confidence had led them to overlook a lot of things. Due to the influence of the robot mutiny, the Robert family had undergone many changes in the past 2 years. From the information Sillin obtained, even though the new models of robots didn't develop in the direction that Shikai hoped for, if they were placed on the battlefield, their offensive power would definitely be much greater. Their weapon configuration, material structure, and liquid core nuclear brain were further upgraded, allowing them to be as stable as the first generation while improving their combat power. At least until now, there hadn't been a single case of a robot mutiny. Shikai admitted that the robots in the new data had improved a lot, but that was not the type that Shikai liked, so Shikai did not focus on them. Shikai's confidence had skyrocketed ever since he created the X-series robot and obtained a new robot named X7 that had a free attribute. X7's appearance rate was less than 1 in 1,000, and the accidental change in the program had given Shikai a lot of hints. He had been busy with his new plan, and it was because of this that his consumption of materials had skyrocketed. Moreover, he was building space fighters for the 11th Squad, so he couldn't use some of the materials he needed. Shikai hadn't run into a situation like this many times in the past. He had everything planned out, only to find that he was running out of materials. It made him so anxious that he was pulling his hair out. This wouldn't have happened in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The Shi family had been accumulating materials in the Empire for a very long time, and they had Black Viper's people and a robot army to help them sort through the materials. Why would they ever run out of basic materials? He had everything he needed except for the fact that he couldn't create the original robots. However, the League of Stars wasn't the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, so Shikai couldn't come up with any good ideas. Therefore, he told Sillin about the situation and asked Sillin for help. After leaving Shikai's workshop, Sillin was thinking about what Shikai had told him. Shikai didn't have the materials, so his plan couldn't be carried out, and he couldn't build a new batch of robots. For the sake of his plan, Shikai had even sent some of the robots he thought to be failures back to the furnace. Moon had ignored Shikai this whole time. Shikai had complained more than once, but neither Moon nor Sigma had ignored him. It was probably because he had no other choice that he finally told Celine about it. After leaving Shikai's workshop, Sillin walked into Shurtang's workshop. Shurtang had been busy with the tunnel all this time. "How's it going?" Sillin asked. "It's much more stable now, but we still can't confirm if there are multiple targets." Shurtang showed Sillin the results of his recent research. Last time, Sillin was able to return to the League of Stars from the Mist Bodhisattva Empire with the help of the Black Box and a few related tools. However, some of the data he obtained during the process indicated that the Black Box wasn't as effective as it used to be, perhaps because it was too old. Moreover, something had happened to the Black Box after Sillin and the others were transported to the League of Stars. Moon had fixed the Black Box after that, but it still couldn't return to its original state. "It's fine if there's only one space fortress like the one we came with. But if the flying object is a bit bigger, or if there are multiple targets at once, I'm afraid we won't be able to succeed," Shurtang said. Shurtang felt a little guilty about this. After all, the results of his research were far too limited. "What's this?" Celine pointed at a rough line diagram Shurtang had drawn on a map. "Oh, I almost forgot about it." Shurtang looked a little spirited at the mention of this. "I've calculated the best passage point in the League of Stars, and it's true that the best passage point is where we came from. But that was in the past. If we exclude the influence of the planet that's loaded with a lot of instruments, and add in the slight changes in the overall magnetic field of Sector Z, I've calculated the best passage point based on the Black Box's current condition, and the result is, this is it." Shurtang spread out a part of the star map for Sillin to see and pointed at the marked point. After seeing that point, Celine was also very happy. This was because the location of that point was very close to their current base, and it was also a relatively remote and barren place. The surroundings were surrounded by planets with a rank D habitability. No one would go there, and it was not eye-catching. This was good news for Silen, who was planning a trip back to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The original, best passage point, had already attracted a lot of attention. If Silen was planning a trip back to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, it would be best if he avoided those people. He didn't want to get himself into trouble in the current environment of the League of Stars. However, Sigma did mention that most of the instruments on the planet where the passage point was located had been destroyed, so there was no need to pay attention to the black box. Now that Shi Tang had calculated a new passage point, it looked like it was time to go there again. If the black box could be restored to its original state 1,000 years ago, then there would be no need for Silen to search for the best passage point to increase his security. Silen still hoped that the black box could be perfected in the future, or perhaps he could create another black box. Silen had studied the black box before. There were a lot of traps left behind by the Shi family back then, so Silen had to postpone his wish to duplicate the black box. With Shi Kai and Shi Mu's help, he should be able to do it in the future, right? When the time came, he wouldn't need to calculate the best passage point anymore. The Robert family was working with the military, but Silen didn't know which military corps they were working with. He didn't know for sure which military corps they were working with, but he did know that the Robert family had created a batch of upgraded robots for combat and a large number of semi-biological mechanical weapons. Their first test subjects were the Hunter Regiment. The first Hunter regiments wouldn't be the 4 great Hunter regiments, but the smaller ones with weaker foundations. No one would remain stagnant. While you were improving, others were also working hard. No one could predict what would happen in the end. Food King Hara said that it was never wrong to be prepared. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't turn their guns on you the next moment. Part of the reason why Silen planned to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire was because of Shi Mu's materials. Another reason was because you, Sigma, and Silen had always wanted to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. But who should I bring with me? After he left Shi Tang's workshop, he went to check on Tico. She was currently teaching Sha Rou and Kong Lujia some medical knowledge, and it had been going on for a long time now. She was very happy to have 2 helpers to help her. A fleet with only 1 doctor wasn't very secure. If a large-scale battle broke out, Tico wouldn't be able to take care of everything on her own. Medics were limited, so it was better to rely on a human. Silen could tell that Mo Heng's workshop was as busy as a bee before he even stepped through the door. Carrie, Xiao Shang, Mogaz, and the others were all helping Mo Heng out. They hung around Mo Heng's workshop every day just so that they could own a fighter of their own. Right now, all of them were trying their best to show their sincerity and help Mo Heng build a space fighter. When he saw Silen, Carrie placed a part in his hand at the place Mo Heng had specified. Then, he wiped his hands on the uniform Mo Heng had given them and asked, "Why are you here, Commander? We're not doing any missions for the time being, are we?" "You guys seem to be very busy," Silen said after glancing at the workshop. Carrie chuckled. "Isn't it to leave a good impression on Academician Mo? All right then, you guys continue to help out. There won't be any quests for a long time to come." "Ha, that's for the best." Xiao Shang, Ba Dao, and the others also let out a sigh of relief. As long as they didn't have to go on missions, they would be able to work until the new fighter jet was built. How satisfying would that be? However, they didn't know that they had missed a chance to go to an unfamiliar star system outside the League of Stars. Elsewhere in the base, Mao was fighting Shu Sag, and Qifeng was teaching Tesoro how to use his claws better. Everyone seemed to be very busy with their own plans. Even when there were no missions, they didn't idle around. Silen told Shikai about his decision to go to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and Shikai was very happy to hear that. He was planning how many materials he could bring back after he returned. The Shi family was a special family in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, but it was also because of this that Shikai was restricted in certain areas. Even when it came to making robots, Shikai couldn't let go. However, things were different in the League of Stars. He had a lot of freedom. Shimu said that he was going to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire no matter what. He wanted to see the Shi family branch's development, explore the environment of the other galaxy, and learn about all the new technology there was. Hui Mao was very happy. He missed both sides. He missed the League of Stars when he was in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and he missed the Mist Bodhisattva Empire again not long after he returned. The moment Silan announced his decision, Whis had already started packing. It had brought along a lot of the new fish biscuits the Food King had given it, and since it couldn't make any more of them after they left, it didn't know how long they would be gone for. Therefore, Whis decided to bring along all of the fish biscuits it had stockpiled. Silan thought that he would bring Tang Qiuqiu to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire to fulfill his promise and take Tang Qiuqiu to see Guan Feng. He believed that Guan Feng would be very happy to see Tang Qiuqiu. Shu Sag, Sha Rou, and Sha Rou wouldn't be going. They didn't have a good impression of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire to begin with, so they were happy to leave. They liked the League of Stars a lot. Even though the League of Stars was a little chaotic right now, it was still a lot better than the pain the Mist Bodhisattva Empire had inflicted on them. They didn't want to go back even if they were beaten to death. Sure Tang was going to be testing the black box, so he would be going with him. Moon, Sigma, Shimu, Cheto, and Silan's stand-in, the X7 that Shikai was so proud of. Except for Yudi, Dias, Carrie, Xiao Shang, and the new members didn't know where Silan was going. They thought that Silan was going on a secret mission again. Silan had mysteriously left a couple of times already, so they weren't curious this time. It was still the same space fortress, but with a few new members. Sigma was very excited, and so was Whis. Tang Qiuqiu, who still didn't know what they were talking about, was a little confused and curious. What kind of place were they talking about? Another galaxy? What was a galaxy? Earlier, Silan didn't explain much to Tang Qiuqiu, and Tang Qiuqiu didn't have much of an understanding of the terms they were talking about. The more she listened, the more she felt that something was off. That was, until she saw something that looked like a giant storm ring. What is that? Tang Qiuqiu grabbed Hui Mao, who was about to take a nap, and asked. Hui Mao's tail arched. It's a very fun place. Chapter 372. Tang Qiuqiu didn't know what kind of fun place Hui Mao was talking about. She never thought that she'd be able to get to the place Silan was talking about this way. When they were passing through the passage, everyone was sitting in their seats with their shields down. It wasn't a pleasant experience. Silan put Tang Qiuqiu's shield to sleep, so Tang Qiuqiu didn't feel too uncomfortable during the journey from the League of Stars to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. When she woke up again, they were already in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The monitors showed that it was still a starry sky outside, and nothing special could be seen. The bastion had appeared very close to where they had left, and there were no patrols or people in that area. One of the monitors inside the bastion was showing news in a language Tang Qiuqiu had never heard before. Silan put on a translator so that Tang Qiuqiu could better understand the lifestyle, social system, and everything else that was different from the League of Stars. Cheto didn't need a translator. He had already memorized the language of the Empire and some of the major planets' dialects from the program Silan and Moon provided. Shimu's translator wouldn't be of much use anyway. He might not be able to memorize every language like Cheto, but he had a pretty good grasp of the common tongue. Hui Mao couldn't wait to log into the Return Forum the moment he returned. The Return Forum had just been established when he left, and it was still in a period of rapid growth. Now, it was the largest academic forum in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and the one with the strongest backing. Shimu could see the uniqueness of the forum from the login screen. There were two badges of authority, one from the Mist Bodhisattva Imperial family, and the other from the Royal Mist Bodhisattva Academy. Shimu had just arrived, but Shikai had told him a lot about the Mist Bodhisattva Empire before Tang Qiuqiu, Cheto, and the others. Because of this, he also understood the significance of these two patterns. Among them were members of the royal family, and other nobles. Shimu was surprised that Sillin was able to win their recognition and support. The Return forum that had once caused a storm in the academic world was now known to most people in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Some people made money by answering the bounty questions in the forum. From some news reports, many civilians benefited from this forum. Some of them went from being penniless to being filthy rich. The rapid development of the Return forum resulted in countless new registrations. The number of people in the forum left the royal family and the RAS speechless. The forum had stabilized, and the number of visitors wasn't growing as fast as it used to be. The last time Hui Mao logged in, the forum hadn't been up for long. Thanks to the influx of new people and talented people, the name Hubie Lu had long since been forgotten by most people. Someone would occasionally mention the name, but it was quickly brushed away. After all, most of the new registrations didn't know who the quarreling expert was. Moreover, a lot of famous scholars and big shots intentionally avoided the name because they didn't want to see or hear it at all. The disappearance of Hubie Lu allowed a lot of people to breathe a sigh of relief. Gradually, the name faded from people's minds. The arena topic on the forums had become a hot topic, and countless people were paying attention to it. Many of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's theories had been overturned in the arena, and it had become a habit for scholars, media, and spectators to log into the forums and watch the debates. It was the same today. However, compared to the day Hui Mao left, the number of spectators had multiplied many times, and the arena had become a lot more complete. It was obvious that the Mist Bodhisattva imperial family and the RAS had put a lot of effort into this forum. However, today was a special day. While a heated debate was taking place in the arena, and the talented people and the famous authorities of various space zones were commenting on the forum, a name that had not appeared for a long time suddenly lit up. Then, when the arena was about to end and the next one was about to begin, a loudspeaker blared on the forum, "My children. I'm back." It was a very arrogant tone. There really wasn't a single person in the arena who dared to make a ruckus outside of the few famous authorities. That was why everyone who was discussing the arena just now stopped talking after Hui Mao's declaration. Some curious people wanted to see who this arrogant guy was, but they soon discovered that the arena's hegemon status was level 0. This time, some people started howling. "You're just level 0, my ass." A bunch of people started criticizing Hubie Lu, one after another. However, some people soon noticed that the celebrities who had been chatting just a moment ago had all fallen silent. In the end, an old user revealed Hubie Lu's glorious past. The forum erupted once more. Sitting in front of the Battlestar Alliance's microcomputer, Hui Mao shook his beard in annoyance. "I can't believe there's a hegemon level. Holy shit, I won so many battles when the forum was first created, but I didn't even get a single hegemon level." The winner of a debate in the arena would get a hegemon badge, and the number of battles they participated in and the number of wins and losses would be calculated accordingly to their hegemon level. However, it was set up later on when the arena system was perfected, and the overlord rank of the arena had also been implemented since then. Whis had left with Sillin before that, so it must not have been able to fish out a rank yet. After Hui Mao logged in, Moon entered the forum as well. Sigma, Cheto, and Shimu were also registered in the Return. In just one day, a few troublesome characters appeared on the Return forum, and a lot of people fainted from anger. Tang Qiuqiu couldn't understand what Whis and the others were talking about, and she didn't know much about academics either. She had never been to school, and she didn't want to go to school either. Uninterested, she took Sillin's Purgatory Thunder Snake and went to the training room to practice. The first destination Battlestar Alliance visited was Shikai's electronic planet. Shimu, Moon, and Sigma would stay with Shikai for the time being. Sigma looked very sad when he saw Chip in his current state. To avoid embarrassment, Shikai didn't show up in front of them. He wanted the three brothers to talk to each other. After 1,000 years, Sigma was finally able to see his brothers again. Of the 5 original robot brothers, only 3 were left. In Moon's words, only 2.5 were left. Sigma hugged a cable attached to Chip's body, blue light streaming down his face like tears. You're still the same, Sigma. You haven't changed a bit. Chip looked at Sigma and patted it with a cable. Then he looked at Moon and said, you don't have to be so sad. It's not like there's no turning back. Let me show you something. Sigma, and Sigma wouldn't be leaving the electronic planet anytime soon. Shimu would stay here to learn more about the Gen family. That was why Silin, Tang Qiuqiu, Cheto, and Hui Mao were arguing with the busy guy at Forum Road. Then, they left on a spaceplane. Silin didn't need to deal with Black Viper at all. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble, Silin didn't need to deal with those brainless bastards at all. After leaving Shikai's electronic planet, Silin's first destination was the Imperial capital. There were some things he wanted to discuss with Genshin and Engenia. Shikai was the one who provided the spaceplane, and it didn't have any noble insignia or special codes. After Silin inputted some information, the spaceplane was able to travel unimpeded across many star realms. Tang Qiuqiu was very unfamiliar with this galaxy, and she was also very curious about it. To think that such a large galaxy was actually an empire, unlike the GAL where there were many different forces. However, Tang Qiuqiu was very dissatisfied with the system of the nobles. She did not like the way they looked at her with superiority. Of course, to Tang Qiuqiu herself, anyone could become a sniper target, whether they were nobles or commoners. There were many patrolling fleets and guards at the edge of the Imperial Star System. Most people who came to the Imperial Star System had to enter through a designated entrance, but some special nobles in the Imperial capital had other entrances. Silin also entered through another entrance, which belonged to the Fudge royal family, the Gen family. Those who entered and exited were all people related to the Gen family, and the spaceplanes and starships that came and went all had the royal family's insignia on them. Silin's spaceplane stood out among these extravagant spaceplanes, and the patrolling fleets couldn't ignore it even if they wanted to. Who's that? It's a commoner's spaceplane, isn't it? Guards! What's with that spaceplane? The nobles who saw Silin's spaceplane all began to make a ruckus. It was embarrassing to see a spaceplane without any noble insignia in the exclusive passage of the nobles, and it was such a shabby spaceplane at that. However, what surprised these people was that not only did the patrolling fleets not stop the spaceplane, they even opened up a path for it to fly in unimpeded. Some dissatisfied people had their servants drive the spaceplane over to stop it, but who knew that the patrolling fleets would turn around and stop them instead? Some people with brains knew that something was wrong, so they quickly held back and stopped making a ruckus. However, the brainless ones were still clamoring to complain and remove the patrolling fleet captain from his position. The patrolling fleet captain didn't reply to them at all. Listening to the righteous threats coming from the communicator, the patrolling fleet captain pursed his lips. Go ahead and complain, you'll be the ones to suffer. Who would dare stop the spaceplane with a direct order from King Fuji and the previous King Fuji? Silin flew past the extravagant spaceplanes, heading straight for Genya's planet. Once King Fuji's order was issued, it would definitely be recorded on the other side. Every order corresponded to a specific person, so after Silin took out the order, Genya quickly received the news. Genya, who was sitting in the courtyard playing with Tortoise, couldn't sit still anymore. He resisted the urge to send someone to meet him. After all, it would be too much of a commotion if he sent someone, and it was better to keep a low profile. Otherwise, it would be detrimental to Silin. After sitting for 2 seconds, Genya got up and walked around the courtyard, looking up at the sky. When he finally saw the spaceplane flying in his direction, Genya felt a little uneasy. He didn't know what news Silin would bring him. On one hand, Genya was eager to know about Engenia and the others, but on the other hand, Genya was afraid that it would be bad news that he didn't want to hear. What a contradiction! How uneasy! There was a landing spot around Genya's courtyard, and the people around it were all people that Genya trusted. After receiving Genya's notice, they quickly cleaned up the landing spot and received the spaceplane. They were already very familiar with Silen. Although they were surprised that Silen had left for such a long time, they didn't say anything. Firstly, their identities didn't allow them to do so. Every core member of the Gen family knew about Silen and Jenya's relationship. Everyone treated him like the young prince of the Gen family. Secondly, Silen was a celebrity in the Mist Bodhisattva family, and a celebrity's actions were always unpredictable and unpredictable. Logically speaking, Silen had to go through a series of inspections before he could bring two strangers over. But Jenya had given the order, so the guards didn't have to go through that step. Tang Qiuqiu and Cheto followed Silen into the courtyard next to the sea. The courtyard was huge, and what surprised Tang Qiuqiu the most was the sea next to it. If Silen hadn't told her about it beforehand, Tang Qiuqiu wouldn't have thought that it was an artificial sea. Hui Mao let out a high-pitched howl the moment he arrived. Then, a thick pillar of water shot into the sky from the artificial sea very quickly. Before the pillar of water even hit the ground, an enormous figure appeared on the surface of the sea and moved swiftly towards the courtyard by the shore. It let out a howl similar to Hui Mao's as it moved. The surrounding guards laughed. Blue Skin had been depressed for so many days, but now that Silen and Hui Mao had finally returned, it was obvious that the big fellow was in a good mood. Blue Skin, I've missed you so much. Hui Mao sprinted, jumped into the air and spread its wings. The guards outside the courtyard were dumbfounded. It had been a while since they last saw it, and now it could actually fly. It's a fucking flying lynx. Hui Mao flapped its wings proudly and flew towards Blue Skin. Blue Skin was sad because Silen and Hui Mao hadn't come to visit and comfort them for a long time. His appetite hadn't been great lately, and he hadn't been hunting much, so the number of fish in the artificial sea had increased a lot. But now, Blue Skin's mood skyrocketed. After it popped its head out of the water, it swung its tail and swam backwards in circles, howling as it did so. Tang Kakikiu's eyes twitched uncontrollably when she saw this. Blue Skin had shocked her quite a bit when he first appeared. There was no doubt that he was a sea beast, but now Tang Kakikiu had the urge to go up and shoot the big fellow a couple of times. Is this a fucking sea beast? This was a miniature version of the alien seal. After Silen greeted Blue Skin, he went into the house with Jenya to discuss business. Tang Kakikiu and Cheto were sitting in the spacious courtyard. One of them was reading a book in the Mist Bodhisattva language, and the other was eating candy produced by the Lessa Empire obediently. Inside the house, Silen played a video of Angenia and the others to Jenya. Jenya couldn't help but tear up as he stared at the people in the video. His long-separated wife and son were in the video. The last time he saw Zhensheng, he was still a tiny child. He couldn't have been bigger when he picked him up. There were also his grandson and granddaughter. Gensheng's name contained the word Xing. Jenya felt that his life had been worth it. Some of the videos were recorded by Silen himself, and some were given to him by Angenia. The ones about Zhensheng, Zhenxingfu, and Zhenxingji were all part of Angenia's collection. Jenya was a little worried about the League of Stars, but there wasn't much he could do right now. The passageway wasn't stable yet, and he couldn't send reinforcements even if he wanted to. Sector S is relatively stable right now. The three great forces have made up their minds, and they're all cooperating with each other. Considering their connections, the flames of war won't extend to them. Silen explained the current situation to Jenya, and the latter felt a lot more at ease. Silen even mentioned Food King Hara. Jenya couldn't help but chuckle when he saw the image of Food King Hara. He was happy for Hara's current achievements. Jenya felt like he had become a lot younger after hearing so much good news. His mental state was the main problem. Although Jenya's body had been improving ever since he returned to the Gen family, his mental state was the main problem. That being said, Jenya's face was glowing every day after Silen returned with the good news. "Oh right, Silen, why don't you stay here and rest for a couple of days? You can go look for Guan Feng later. That guy has a bad temper lately, and I don't know why, but a lot of his students have been scolded." "Bad temper? Guan Feng usually displayed his gentle and scholarly side, so what exactly was it that made Guan Feng lose his temper? I don't know why he's so angry, but it can't be a big deal. I think it's his personal business, Genya added. Since it wasn't a big deal, Silen didn't worry about it. It wasn't Black Viper, the RAS, or the Empire's politics. He heard that Guan Feng had a bad temper for the past couple of days, so Silen decided to leave it to his senior brothers and sisters. After resting at Genya's place for a couple of days, Genya treated both Cheto and Tang Qiuqiu very well. He knew that Cheto loved books, so he sent over a lot of collectible books. He also sent over all kinds of candies and things to protect Tang Qiuqiu's teeth. Candies must be eaten, and teeth must be protected. After staying at Genya's place for a couple of days, Silen left for the affiliated schools. As an honorary scholar of the RAS, Silen had a lot more freedom than most people in the affiliated schools. Not many people paid attention to Silen now, even though he used to be at the top of AF3's ranking. When Silen first disappeared, a lot of people doubted Silen's abilities. His absence made those who didn't think highly of Silen believe their own judgment even more. That was until one of the results of Guan Feng's big project was announced not long ago. Guan Feng was listed at the top of the list, and Silen was right behind him. The project introduction also included all kinds of achievements Silen had made in the project. The voices of doubt had died down, but many people who wanted to find Silen discovered that Silen was nowhere to be found. No matter how much effort they put in, they just couldn't find him. It was lunchtime, and Guan Feng was cooking a nutritious meal for himself as usual. Guan Feng had just sat down when Silen arrived. However, Guan Feng's expression didn't change when he saw Silen. He didn't make a sound, and he didn't say anything when we shamelessly jumped onto the table to eat his food. Silen sat on the sofa in the living room and didn't interrupt Guan Feng's meal. Guan Feng finished his lunch and had the robot take care of the dishes. He wiped his mouth, rinsed his mouth and wiped his face. Then, he leaned against the sofa with a cup of tea in hand. "You're finally willing to come back?" He sure was angry. Silen smiled. He didn't try to find an excuse or explain himself. "Get out of my sight. I'm going to take an afternoon nap." Guan Feng turned around and prepared to go upstairs after he said this unhurriedly. 2 sentences, Teacher Guan. I'll leave immediately after that. Guan Feng stopped and looked at Silen. "Half a minute." "All right." Silen passed Guan Feng a document with some data and icons on it. Guan Feng took 2 minutes to read through the document, which was longer than the half a minute he gave himself. This meant that Silen didn't have to leave for now. It was a document about the Purgatory Thunder Snake Sea. Silen had modified some parts of the original design after using it. Since he had experienced it himself, he naturally understood some of the details. Guan Feng didn't say anything about the document. Instead, he asked, "What's the second thing?" "The second thing is that I've let someone else use the Purgatory Thunder Snake B, E, and K. Moreover, she's doing very well right now. I hope that you can meet her, Teacher Guan." Guan Feng paused his movement of drinking tea and sat down on the sofa. Guan Feng's action made Silen feel a lot more reassured. This was a discussion. Guan Feng put down his cup and asked, "Information." Silen handed Guan Feng a document about Tang Qiuqiu that he had prepared a long time ago. "She's uneducated, but she has the best gun sense and talent I've ever seen." Guan Feng didn't comment on Silen's evaluation, but he couldn't deny that he was shocked when he saw Tang Qiuqiu's information. She was young, uneducated, and her body was weak at the beginning. But all of that was wiped out by the shooting data later on. Why was Guan Feng so angry recently? It was because he couldn't find a second person who was suitable to use the S-gun other than Silen. Goryo, Pastura, and Fu Qingqing were all applying to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake S-gun. Goryo's gun model had changed from E to K, and he thought that he had mastered K as well. He wanted to apply to use the S-gun just like his senior brothers and sisters. However, they were all scolded away by Guan Feng. Some people even came over to plead for mercy, and Guan Feng didn't hold back. That was how his temper came to be. Recently, Guan Feng was wondering if he should go out and find more suitable people to train. He didn't like anyone in the affiliated school, and they were all arrogant bastards. He wouldn't even spare them a glance, much less a purgatory thunder snake. However, Guan Feng stared at the document in his hand and pondered. Cheto and Tang Qiuqiu were waiting in the flying car outside Guan Feng's apartment. Guan Feng didn't allow strangers inside. The moment Tang Qiuqiu put a candy in her mouth, Silan told Tang Qiuqiu to come in through the communicator. Tang Qiuqiu grabbed the candy bag and touched the barrel out of habit. She suddenly remembered that the barrel was at the League of Stars' building, and that she had come with the Purgatory Thunder Snake Silan had given her. However, Silan had put away the Purgatory Thunder Snake, so she didn't have a gun with her. Plus, guns weren't allowed in the affiliated school. Tang Qiuqiu was a little uncomfortable without a gun, so she was a little uneasy. It was only when she saw Silan after she walked through the door that Tang Qiuqiu's uneasiness eased a little. Sitting down next to Silan, Tang Qiuqiu examined Guan Feng from head to toe. Is this the person who set up the Purgatory Thunder Snake? While Tang Qiuqiu was examining Guan Feng was examining Tang Qiuqiu as well. He could see a bit of uneasiness in Tang Qiuqiu's eyes, but nothing else. She was a very pure person. Guan Feng gave her a good impression in his mind. Are you feeling uneasy? Guan Feng asked. Yes, Tang Qiuqiu admitted openly. Moreover, with Silan around, Tang Qiuqiu wasn't afraid of anything happening. She was a lot calmer. Why? I don't have a gun. Guan Feng let out a rare chuckle at Tang Qiuqiu's answer. It was the first time Guan Feng had laughed in so many days. Come with me. Guan Feng rose to his feet and led Silan and Tang Qiuqiu to the shooting room. Guan Feng's shooting room was the best one Tang Qiuqiu had ever seen in her life. Everything inside the room was of high quality, and the protective gear was of excellent craftsmanship. Guan Feng pressed a button, and the wall split down the middle to reveal a shelf. Guan Feng took out a box from one of the shelves. He opened the box and found a pile of gun parts inside. There was a Purgatory Thunder Snake pattern on the box. Guan Feng quickly assembled the parts into a gun with a wave of his hand. Tang Qiuqiu recognized the gun, and Silan had one as well. It was a Purgatory Thunder Snake K. Guan Feng passed the assembled Purgatory Thunder Snake K to Tang Qiuqiu. Try it. Tang Qiuqiu shot Silan a glance and accepted the gun under Silan's encouraging gaze. Guan Feng was the one who controlled the target, so Tang Qiuqiu didn't know where the target would come from, how big it was, or how fast it would be. Are you ready? Guan Feng rarely asked this question. He usually didn't ask this question when he was testing his students. He always started straight away. No. Tang Qiuqiu walked to the side and put on the protective gear on the shelf. Then, she stood at the shooting point. I'm ready, Tang Qiuqiu said. Guan Feng's students didn't wear protective gear during the shooting test unless Guan Feng requested it. Tang Qiuqiu was the first one to do so. Guan Feng didn't say anything when Tang Qiuqiu put on the protective gear. He turned on the control switch. The image inside the room changed, and it looked like Tang Qiuqiu was standing in a forest full of trees. Whoosh, a green object that looked almost the same color as the surrounding scenery flew out. Bang! Tang Qiuqiu fired the first shot. Then, the targets appeared one after another. Tang Qiuqiu fired again and again. Her movements were a bit jerky at first, but now she was very familiar with them. With Tang Qiuqiu's stamina, there was almost no time for her to aim. Seeing that Tang Qiuqiu was in the zone, Silan pulled over a chair and sat down. He believed that Tang Qiuqiu would give Guan Feng a pleasant surprise. Chapter 373. Guan Feng was controlling the joystick in his hand, and the targets around him were moving at high speed. Meanwhile, Tang Kakikyu was firing non-stop, and the time between each shot was getting shorter and shorter. Guan Feng's attention wasn't on the hit rate on the screen. Instead, he was staring at Tang Kakikyu. It was just as Celine had said. This little girl had an extraordinary talent, or rather, it was closer to an instinct. She was calm, without hesitation, and every shot was filled with great confidence and decisiveness. She was a natural-born marksman. It had nothing to do with physique or age. Celine smiled when he saw the light in Guan Feng's eyes growing brighter and brighter. He believed that Guan Feng would be in a good mood from now on. Finally, Guan Feng turned off the joystick in his hand. The room returned to its previous state. Tang Kakikyu looked at Guan Feng in puzzlement before stopping a bit reluctantly. She liked this kind of shooting training, and the conditions were perfect. She felt like she was in the middle of a fight. Of course, Tang Kakikyu would have been happier if the targets were humans. After all, she had killed far more humans than any other animal in her career. Tang Kakikyu walked to the side and put the gun back into the box. Then, she started taking off her protective gear. You're the first person to wear protective gear when coming to my place. Why are you wearing protective gear? Because you don't trust yourself? Guan Feng asked. Tang Kakikyu looked at Celine for a moment before turning to Guan Feng. I don't trust you. Guan Feng was the one who gave her the gun. There was no way Tang Kakikyu would trust a stranger's gun completely. She even held the gun in her hand for a moment to make sure that it was the same as the one Celine had given her. Only then did she continue. Secondly, every gun, even if they were of the same type and model, would always have a slight difference in performance. It wasn't her own gun, and it wasn't the gun she was used to using. It was like she was looking at a stranger. She didn't understand or trust it. After shooting a few times, Tang Kakikyu gradually became familiar with the new gun in her hands. Now that she had an idea of how to shoot, it felt more smooth. Guan Feng wasn't angry at Tang Qiuqiu's answer. Instead, he talked a lot with Tang Qiuqiu. Celine sat on the side and scratched Huemao's chin, allowing the two to continue their conversation. Guan Feng was in an exceptionally good mood today because of Tang Kakikyu's incident, so he allowed Cheto to enter the room as well. However, Guan Feng's eyes flashed with surprise when he saw Cheto, but he didn't probe into the matter. He was no longer one of Black Viper's 3 great leaders, so he didn't care about anything else. Right now, all he wanted to do was talk to Tang Qiuqiu a little more. The girl was growing more and more curious. Due to Guan Feng's rare good mood and Tang Qiuqiu's performance, Guan Feng announced that he had accepted Tang Qiuqiu as his disciple on the same day. It wasn't easy to become Guan Feng's disciple. Guan Feng was growing more and more famous by the day, and a lot of people wanted to learn from him. He didn't care if you were a noble or someone else, Guan Feng didn't give face to anyone. Right now, Guan Feng had both power and money. He didn't lack either fame or wealth, so he wouldn't be able to recruit anyone even if he tried to pull some strings. Fuck off. This comparison made Tang Qiuqiu's uniqueness even more obvious. Although she wasn't as versatile as Celine, and her constitution wasn't as good as Celine's, Tang Qiuqiu's marksmanship was pure and unadulterated. It was pure talent that made Guan Feng feel like he had found a treasure. Oh right, Celine, I have something for you. You've been gone for a long time, so it's about time you finished a mission. Guan Feng tossed an electronic card to Celine. Celine caught it and pressed a button on it. A light screen popped up with a line of words on it. Invitation. It was an invitation for the selection test. It was time for the selection test again. The organizers had sent out a lot of invitations and counted which instructors had been invited. Celine looked at the description and some of the benefits and rewards. It was very generous. Money was one thing, but there were also certain privileges such as access to the RAS warehouse to get materials. The RAS was very rich, and this wealth was mostly reflected in their research. Composite materials were one of them. Black Viper had Black Viper's patent, and the RAS was no slouch either. The RAS had produced a lot of research over the years, and Sillin had accepted Guanfeng's mission because he was interested in those composite materials. The Empire's academic world underwent a reform after the Return Forum appeared. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the Three Kings, and the RAS worked together to put in a lot of effort into the selection test. They changed the selection test time and the number of examinees. In the past, in order to participate in the selection test of the affiliated schools, one had to be recommended. Those without recommendation cards were not qualified to participate in the assessment test. However, after the reform, there was an additional requirement. In addition to recommendation cards, there would also be a certain number of places on the Return Forum. Those places were completely based on one's true ability, and it was purely academic. Although a lot of people still criticized the system, it was a lot better than before. It gave more people a chance. When Sillin and the others came, they came in a group of 3 people and a cat. When they left, it was 2 people and a cat. Tang Qiuqiu was left behind by Guanfeng. Guanfeng and Tang Qiuqiu were researching the world of firearms, so they didn't have time to pay attention to the selection test instructor's invitations. In Guanfeng's opinion, they could be ignored. Guanfeng was going to refuse them at first, but he happened to run into Sillin and Sillin. Sillin was more than qualified to do so. Since Sillin had accepted Guanfeng's mission, he had to treat it seriously. Of course, he had to take care of the exams he missed while he was away from the academy. Guanfeng had already informed the instructors about this, and a lot of instructors knew that Sillin was a special student. Therefore, the makeup exams went relatively smoothly. Sillin's makeup exam results were very good, and the instructors didn't say anything. They weren't just giving face to Guanfeng, they were also giving face to Sillin. In fact, a lot of the instructors thought highly of Sillin. Sillin said what they didn't dare to say, did what they didn't have the ability to do. Moreover, he created the Return Forum, which was the most authoritative forum in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire where scholars gathered. It was much more influential than the RAS's internal communication forum. After the makeup exam was over, Sillin took care of his classes and began preparing for the selection test that was going to be held on the satellite not far away from the affiliated school's main campus in 5 days. Sillin passed his library card to Cheto. For the past few days, Cheto had been spending his time in the affiliated school's library and enjoying himself. That was why Sillin wasn't worried that Cheto would feel bored. Right now, the guy was spending the night in the library every single day, and unlike humans, Cheto didn't need to sleep at night. Instead, he sat at his desk and read attentively at night. Even the librarians who worked at the library recognized this strange student. It was said that there were even some students who got addicted to chatting with Cheto while they were searching for information. At the end of the day, Cheto was a celebrity in the affiliated school's library. Sillin took the invitation card Guanfeng gave him and went to the organizer to report. The organizer hadn't expected Guanfeng to accept the invitation at first. He just sent it out as usual and waited for Guanfeng's rejection letter. However, the rejection letter never came. They waited for a while longer, but it still didn't come. Therefore, some people began to speculate that Teacher Guan had forgotten about the invitation in a fit of anger. The organizer was a little surprised when Sillin passed the invitation card to the organizer. It took him a long time to realize that Sillin was going to replace Guanfeng as a member of the assessment team. "How's Teacher Guan doing lately?" The organizer tried to get close to Sillin while handling the invitation card. Outsiders might not know, but some of the higher-ups of the affiliated school knew that there were a lot of people behind Sillin. Teacher Guan wasn't the only one, but the royals and the imperial family as well. Everyone knew that Sillin had a good relationship with the 3 princes of the royal family. Moreover, other than this reason, Sillin was the #1 administrator of the Return Forum he created. Although this administrator didn't really manage the forum after it was created, his status as an administrator was still there. People in the academic and educational circles had to give some face to Sillin. Otherwise, this troublemaker, Grandpa's roar on the forum would be more than enough to make them suffer. Teacher Guan has been doing well lately. Sillin replied with a smile. Didn't you say that Teacher Guan lost his temper because of something? That's all in the past now. It's nothing serious. Teacher Guan's been in a good mood lately. If there's anything you want to talk to him about, you can try. Everyone knew that Guan Feng had lost his temper. There were a lot of people who wanted to ask Guan Feng for help, but none of them dared to do so. The organizer wanted to get some information from Sillin. Sillin understood, so he revealed some information to the organizer. After processing the personal information on the invitation card, the organizer passed the newly registered invitation card to Sillin. Sillin's name had already been recorded in the assessment team, and his information had been refreshed. Therefore, all Sillin needed to do was bring this invitation card with him to the preparatory campus. As for Hui Mao, it had participated in the selection test because of Sillin. Its role was the same as King Kong and the others that Sillin and the others had encountered during the selection test, and that was to cause trouble for the candidates. To put it bluntly, it was toying with them. Hui Mao was very happy to take on this task. Not only could it fight alongside King Kong and the others, it could also earn some extra money to buy cat food by toying with the new students. Why not? Since this was the first selection test after the reform of the system, there were more people coming to the preparatory campus. Many buildings had been built there as well. Before Sillin left for the preparatory campus, Zhen Xingming and the others pulled him over for a friendly chat. They had only wanted to catch up with Sillin because they hadn't seen him for a long time. They didn't expect that Sillin would be on the list of invigilators this time. The three of them were overjoyed. As usual, they would take one of the 5 tests together with the candidates who came to participate in the selection test. It would count as their semester assessment. Sillin, you have to go easy on us. That's right, we're counting on you. You have to help us. I don't know if we'll be as lucky as last time and run into good teammates. If we're unlucky and get a low score, we'll definitely get beaten up when we get back. Sillin was helpless against the trio's complaints and requests. He didn't know anything about the details of the test at all. After the reform, the higher-ups were even more tight-lipped about certain secrets. This was a joint decision of the royal family and the RAS. No one dared to object. Because Zhen Xingming and the others had dragged him to drink the day before, Sillin arrived at the preparatory campus a little late the next day. Most of the invigilators were already in the dorms by the time he arrived. When Sillin went to check in, he ran into one of the main invigilators. It was an old instructor from AF1. He looked like he was easy to talk to, but he was actually an old urchin who often had the temperament of a child. Sillin had just finished his makeup test 2 days ago. Yo, Sillin. You're going to have to deduct your pay for coming so late, said the old instructor. It hasn't expired yet, so it's not considered late. Sillin took out his invitation card and handed it to the person handling the check-in while replying to the old instructor. The old instructor looked at the check-in form displayed on the device and chuckled. He said to the person in charge, transfer him to the temporary accommodation area. The one on the first floor of Block C is pretty good. Take it as punishment for being late. The temporary accommodation area was where the candidates lived. It was where Sillin had lived before. The person in charge looked at Sillin, then at the old instructor. He moved his finger and bound Sillin's information to the temporary accommodation area. Sillin looked at the old instructor who was smiling kindly and accepted the check-in and invitation card. Before he left, he said to the old instructor, "You look like a fox when you smile." Thanks for the compliment. Oh right, old man Guan seems to be doing well recently. I heard that he took in a new disciple. You have a little junior sister now. Yes, that's what happened. You've fallen out of favor, young man. The old instructor said with a regretful look. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I was the one who recommended my new junior sister. After saying that, Celine waved her hand and left. Watching Sillin leave, the old instructor rubbed his short beard and humphed. Old Fox Guan is such a lucky bastard. The person in charge of the accommodation area was silent. He thought to himself, that's so sour. When Silen arrived at the temporary accommodation area, he recalled the first time he came here. These unfamiliar faces were the same as the people in his year. They were all full of hope and ambition. From the preparatory campus planet, they could see the big official campus planet. That was their final destination. This place was just a temporary place for them to stay. That planet was like their religion. It was a place where they could change their fate. Some of these people were born poor, some were descendants of mutants, and some were nobles. No matter who they were, this was a rare opportunity. Building C, first floor, room 103. Right now, not all of the examinees had arrived. There were still 2 days left, and the members of the assessment team would arrive a little earlier than the examinees. This was because the assessment team needed to make a series of deployments and assignments, and there were still a few more meetings to be held after that. They would not be idle at all. Silen swiped the card on the door and walked into the dormitory. The candidates' dormitory was definitely not as good as the assessment team's dormitory, but compared to the dormitories of many schools, this was already very good. Silen was not dissatisfied with this. 2 of the 5 rooms in room 103 were already occupied. Silen randomly picked one of the remaining 3 rooms. There wasn't much to tidy up. It was just that Huemao's cat nest was a little more troublesome. The old cat wanted to lay a blanket in the cat nest. Silen struggled for a long time before he managed to tidy it up. You can clean up your own nest later. I won't interfere, Silen said. Don't worry, I'll have the robots do it. Huimao walked around the cat nest, rolled around, and nodded in satisfaction. The 2 examinees who arrived first were probably training, so they weren't in the dormitory. Silen made some food and then left while carrying his toolbox. This time, Silen would participate in the deployment of some of the test sites. Guan Feng had taught him a lot of dirty tricks, so Silen was too embarrassed to torture the poor candidates. He chose a few suitable ones and deployed them according to the situation. After he came out, he saw that there was a match going on in the open-air training field in front of Building C. There were a lot of people watching. The candidates were martial arts. One was an alien, and the other was a normal human. However, neither of them were weak and were evenly matched. It was a stalemate. Silen prepared to leave after watching for a while. He still had things to do. But he had only taken 2 steps when he heard a faint sound of something cutting through the air. It was very hard to hear in this noisy field. Whoosh! Silen raised his hand and caught a soft object between 2 fingers. This object looked a little like a soft bullet a child would play with, but it was slightly smaller than a normal soft bullet. Its quality was a little better, and it shot out faster than a normal soft bullet. On the premise that it wasn't fatal, it would cause the opponent to suffer a little. Through the crowd, Silen saw a person sitting on a shelf at the edge of the field. It was a girl about the same age as Tang Qiuqiu. When Silen looked over, the girl made a face at him. She didn't feel guilty at all about being discovered. Some people had also seen the scene of Celine catching the soft bullet. Quite a few people had suffered at the hands of the little girl over the past few days, so Celine being able to catch the soft bullet surprised some people. Silen ignored them and flicked the soft bullets into the nearest trash bin with a flick of his fingers. Then, he left the place. Who's that guy? Someone who saw the scene asked the candidate next to him. I'm not sure. I've never heard of such a powerful person. He can't be from our star region. That kid is quite strong. No wonder he doesn't care about the things here. That's called hiding your true colors. Being too arrogant makes it easy for others to plot against you. After Silen left, the girl sitting on the shelf pulled up her sleeve, revealing a bracelet. It looked like a very exquisite accessory, but it was actually a communication device. Help me investigate someone, the girl said into the communication device. Yes. The person on the other side of the communication device replied respectfully. After Silen left the temporary accommodation area, he went to inspect the terrain of the field. The guards there were quite surprised by this young member of the assessment team. Could he be a candidate in disguise? After checking Silen's identity information and invitation cards several times, the guards finally let Silen in. Silen, do you want to install a hidden weapon? Hui Mao said as he squatted on a tree after running around madly. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.